Welcome into the DriveHubo.com studios for the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison taking you through the afternoon. Big decision day for Purdue's Zach Edey. Has to make his choice as to whether or not he will keep his name in consideration for the 2023 NBA draft or return to Purdue and all that sweet, sweet NIL money. We'll get into that a little bit later today and, of course, have full reactions tomorrow once a decision is made. But a lot of NFL throughout our mix today. Matt Verderame going to join us a little bit later. He's a great national reporter covering all things NFL, currently staffed at SI Now. We'll keep it local as well. Bottom of the 1 o'clock hour, Nate Atkins going to join us. And we'll continue to roll through the day as well, closing off with a little bit of NBA coverage. But before we get into that boat, James, since we have the opportunity here with you in studio, you, the resident Colts beat writer over at The Athletic, in case you don't subscribe, go get James' work there over at The Athletic. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at RomeoVilleKid. You can follow Eddie Garrison on Twitter at EddieGarrison_. You can follow myself at The J Cook. But you had mentioned to us that a piece like this was coming at some point this offseason in regards to the Colts quarterback room, and not so much the competition that we're going to be continue to dissecting throughout this offseason into training camp and ultimately until a starter is named for week 1. But this one more focuses on what Gardner Minshew brings to the table, regardless of whether or not he is the one that's under center to start the season for the Colts.
Absolutely. I felt like there was so much hype around Anthony Richardson, and rightfully so. He's the exciting new pick. He has all the stuff you can't teach. However, right now, today, the better quarterback is Gardner Minshew. And so the piece was basically to lay out that Gardner is not just a gimmick quarterback. Minshew mania, it's fun, it's cool, but he can actually play. And so, to have 45 touchdowns against 15 interceptions in your career, that speaks volumes to your ability to play the position. Not saying he's a franchise guy, not saying he's a star, and I think he's actually very self-aware of what he means to each team that he's been a part of. However, it doesn't mean that he's going to concede anything to Anthony Richardson, and he shouldn't. And to me, maybe I'll flesh this out more later down the line when we get just more live viewing of the team and the quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson needs to close the gap, in my opinion. Not, to where they're even or he's better than them by the beginning of the season. It's just, it can't be a huge gap in my mind and you still throw Anthony Richardson out there, because at that point, you have to question how ready he is, in my opinion. So people can defer or feel differently. However, I just think that this is a good spot for the Colts to be in, considering that Gardner Minshew is a really good backup / bridge quarterback and probably a fringe starter on another team in the league. So I think that he's someone who's going to make waves in that room and make it so Anthony Richardson isn't given anything, and he shouldn't be. I think that he has to earn it. I get it. It's a little bit different, Jimmy, when you're talking about earning it for the number 4 pick, because at some point you got to play the guy. However, I do think that Gardner is going to push him in really good ways to help him get better.
Minshew has stated in press conferences, media availability, that he understood, like anybody would, where the Colts were drafting, the need for a quarterback, and the expectation that despite signing here on a 1-year deal, that they would likely be taking a quarterback in the 2023 draft, which they obviously did with Anthony Richardson. He's going to be, once again, an unrestricted free agent in 2024. This is just a 1-year prove-it deal is not the phrase, but it is a 1-year opportunity for him as he continues to fight for positioning within NFL locker rooms. You phrase it to a T there with where his career expectations are at this point for Gardner Minshew. He's a quality backup. You've seen it time and time again throughout the NFL, throughout the NFL the last couple of years. Having a valuable backup quarterback is as important as anything from a short-term standpoint, right? Long-term, you know that the ship is basically going to sink. But if it's a short-term issue, having a quality backup, very strong. Now, Minshew, as you mentioned, isn't going to partake in this process in the lead-up to training camp in week 1 with the thought of being the backup. He would ideally, like anybody would that has that competitive juice, want to be the starter here. Let's say he's not, and he's the backup from not Richardson's point of view, but Minshew's point of view. He's known this was a possibility. He's mentioned it at every turn when asked about it, and he's shown a willingness to be okay with that. Where does his mentality, his focus, his future within this league change, if at all, knowing that it is a one-year deal with a team that thinks they have their franchise quarterback of the future in this scenario starting ahead of him already?
I think that he's already proven enough in this league to have teams still be interested in him after this season, whether he stays here or not. So I don't expect him to feel like, oh my gosh, I haven't done enough to, prove my stay in this league. I know he's been in the league, I believe, since 2019. So he's a veteran, but not, a deep veteran. However, he will become that. I think that he's shown enough. And then also, he's very self-aware, which helps when you're going through sort of this cat and mouse game at quarterback, because you can't make any promises, but you also can't be delusional if you're a guy back there and and I asked him point blank, does this change your approach as a quarterback, knowing that Anthony Richardson was brought in to be the face of the franchise? Not saying that you weren't brought in to do great things here as well, but we all know that, I know that. And anybody else saying they don't know that is lying. So he said, no, it doesn't change my approach at all. I'm going to go out there and try to have fun and compete. And I think that is going to add to that room and to the team because, again, you want to see the young guy play. I think that's what everyone wants to see within the franchise, maybe except Gardner Minshew because he wants to play as well. However, I don't think that it comes from a point of hating on the young guy. I think it's, I'm going to compete against this dude, do what I'm supposed to do and let the chips fall where they may. And best case scenario for the Colts would be letting the chips fall in the lap of Anthony Richardson.
One thing I do want to point out, yes, that you guys did witness Gardner Minshew take the first 4 reps with the first team, but Kevin noted this on his notebook on 1075thefan.com was that he noticed that after that, Gardner Minshew didn't take a single rep in 7-on-7 or 11-on-11 with the first team. It was all Anthony Richardson. So to me, I think we can monitor who's out there starting with them, but I think the thing to monitor more would be the number of reps that is taken in comparison.
Yeah, good point, Eddie. When I was there at OTAs, they split the first team reps, and obviously it went to 7-on-7 and 11-on-11, but then Richardson did get more reps overall than anybody else because he was getting the first team reps and he was also splitting the second team reps with Sam Ehlinger. And so obviously, as everyone knows, it's been repeated over and over. He needs reps. And so you have to get him as much reps as you can, especially now when it's early. And I expect it to continue throughout the offseason just because that's his biggest knock. It's not that he's incompetent or he can't play. It's that he hasn't played enough. And so how do you create an environment for him to do that within reason? Now, I don't think anything's ever going to be the live thing. You can't simulate what it's going to be like in week 1, when you're playing against Jacksonville at home and it's loud or they make a big play and they're trying to crush you and humble you and beat the new guy who everyone is saying is going to be a top 5 player in the league if he hits the ceiling. Like, that's going to be a motivational factor. But at the same time, you have to keep it within reason and know that there's going to be struggles, but he has to play at some point. I mean, he cannot get better without playing. And I thought it was even, and this says a lot about Gardner's attitude and his approach, he said it himself. He's like, I think you get better by playing. Now, this is the guy who knows that only means that if the other guy plays, he doesn't. And so for him to say that just flatly and honestly, I was like, okay, that's a real dude right there, because I don't know how many guys in his position would be saying that, given that they want to play as well.
There's such a weird conversation happening locally in regards to what is present on the Colts schedule this year and the opportunity that's in front of them. James, I agree with you that when you look at Anthony Richardson and where his shortcomings may be and the evaluations that Shane Steichen, Jim Bob Cooter, and the like are evaluating with him to see if they think he's ready, to see if they think that all it is a repetition factor. It's not an issue with understanding the playbook. It's not an issue with picking up exotic coverages or understanding the looks the defenses are giving you. And that's going to happen, but you're going to learn to adapt from those as you see them in live game action. It's one thing to see it in a film room. It's another thing to adapt to it on the fly if an opposing defense sees a weakness and they're giving you throughout a game multiple different looks of that particular coverage and you can't solve it and you're having to fight throughout a game to be able to figure that puzzle out. Step A in that process is seeing it on film, being able to point it out and adjust to it. Step B is then implementing it in with repetition. That's a longer way of saying that there's this conversation about Gardner Minshew gives the Colts the best chance to win. And I know this is not something that maybe diehard fans want to hear, but this season, if Minshew is your quarterback, regardless for how long, but Gardner Minshew is your man under center, and the reason is Richardson's not quite ready, and Minshew gives us a better chance to win, my question is, who cares? And here's why. Because, and this is the cynical way of looking at this, most Colts fans that are realists or understand where this franchise is at right now know they're not winning anything this year and winning anything of real substance. I know there's a hunger within the fan base to take the South. That would be great, right? To finally capture a division title, and making the playoffs is fun. We saw that in rapid fashion with the NFL playoffs and a longingness to have the Colts back there, and we've complained about it for a number of weeks about the Pacers not being in the NBA playoffs and missing that environment and the vibe around the city. And I want all of those things. But if it is a Minshew gives you a better chance to win now, and I don't think this is going to happen, but if it's Minshew gives you a better chance to win now, so we're going to play him, it's a futile exercise because Richardson needs reps, and if Minshew's your quarterback, here's your best case scenario next year. Surprise the Jaguars win the South. Hello, Cincinnati in the first round. Goodbye, Colts. Thanks for coming. That is the bleak picture that I can paint out there. That's not how locker rooms think. That's not how front offices think. But they need to really look hard at what this season can be. And if you want to get growing pains, in theory, out of the way right away by having a rookie quarterback out there, or if you want to play to win 3 more games, hang a South title banner, and be in Cancun by the first week of January.
My only pushback to that will be just how big of a gap is it? Like I said, I think that he has to...
Between the quarterbacks?
Between the quarterbacks. Okay. It can't be a huge gap.
If it's massive, then yeah, we're having a whole different conversation.
And that's where I'm throwing it out there. We have not seen enough to make that assessment. I know everyone wants to say he's trending upward, and I was saying this yesterday to a couple buddies of mine. Everyone has a great offseason. Everyone has great OTAs. Everyone has great training camps, great preseason. All of these things are great. Pro days
are amazing, James.
You hear it all the time, and then you get to the season, and then you start to see some truth and some realness come out. I mean, Matt Painter always makes a joke about it down there at Purdue. He's like, everyone had a great offseason. No one's going to get up here and say we did not have a great offseason. And so I say that all to say, with Richardson, let's pump the brakes just a little bit because there is a massive leap that he has to make. And I think that might have even been understated on my end, with the excitement around him, what he can do, how humble he is. He's a great person, so it's easy to root for the kid to succeed. However, let's not forget that he only started 13 games. He was 6-7 as a starter in college. He was not a star player in college like some players were who still have a hard time bridging the gap. I get the Jalen Hurts comparisons. Physically, it makes sense. But Jalen Hurts won a lot of games at Alabama. He was, one of the best players in college football. No one said that about Richardson throughout his lone season as a starter. He was not one of the best players in college football by any stretch of the imagination. Now, there were flashes of, okay, this kid could be special, but just flashes. I mean, you got to see the good and the bad. And so I think that we give so much attention to what he could be. It's like, okay, let's also rein it back in and remember what he is. So I still think that if he were to close that gap and become, just competent enough as far as knowing the offense, feeling comfortable back there, even he was saying he's got to learn, a 5-step drop instead of what he learned in college, which I think was a 3-step drop, things like that. When he learns those things, if he can learn them really quickly, that is remarkable to me considering where he is right now, where he was a few months ago in college. I mean, the last guy to start this few games and go in the first round was Mitchell Trubisky. He had 1 Pro Bowl season in Chicago, and he never got his 5th-year option picked up. He was out. Now he's back up in Pittsburgh. The last guy to have a completion percentage for their career in college as low as Anthony Richardson was Jake Locker, taken in the first round, that is. And, he lasted 4 years in the league and retired. So, again, he's not those guys, but he also
built
isn't
very differently too. And I know you're.
Oh, absolutely.
I understand you're not glossing over that. You know
but
that.
He's also not Cam Newton, and he's not Lamar Jackson either. You know, even though you have some of the traits. So that's what makes him so fascinating, because it really could go either way. And again, you want to see the person succeed, because I've been saying this as well, Jimmy. I don't think that he will, if he does not pan out, it won't be because he didn't work hard, or he didn't try, or he's not focused. Like, the kid is focused. It just comes down to now, how well of an infrastructure has Shane Steichen and them built around him, and how quickly can he get up to speed. And again, if that doesn't happen by week 1, it's not a failure. It's not an indictment on him or the team. It's just the fact that maybe he was not as far along as people thought he was.
I want to add one clarifier here, because I think you understand fully what I'm saying, but I don't want you to think that I'm saying you start him because it's Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson right away. You start him because it gives the Colts a stronger chance to win the AFC South this year. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
And I want to make this clear to our listening audience as well, to understand how maybe crazy they might think that my observation on this is, but it's just how I feel about what Richardson could be. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he's understanding everything from a in the quarterback room standpoint. Mm-hmm. He's understanding things in practice. It's not a matter of, well, we're trying to have him have 4 or 5 audibles at his disposal, and he doesn't know what's going on, or he's missing a corner. That's not what I'm talking about. Let's say he's good on all that, and they come to the conclusion that it's a repetition issue, and that only 13 starts, there's going to be growing pains, but he needs the reps. He has to start week 1. If that was plate A over here, option A is Richardson starts, but to be clear, I think it's a rough year. And honestly, I wouldn't care. This is very strong, I understand. I wouldn't care if he broke Peyton's interception record, as long as there was clear substance that he is a rookie with growing pains. I would take that versus all that same scenario. He's learning the offense. He understands everything. It's a repetition issue, but Minshew's still a little better than he is. Right. I would still take Richardson in that scenario, even if you promised me Minshew would win the South, but they would lose in the first round. If you laid that out to me, I would tell you it's a waste of a year. And the reason is that at this point, in this scenario I'm laying out, Shane Steichen is not saying you don't know the playbook. Shane Steichen is not saying, man, he's got too many bad habits. He's got happy feet in there. Shane Steichen is not saying he doesn't trust the offensive line. He's saying it's a repetition issue. We need to get him out there. I don't want to see Minshew for a season if that is the diagnosis that he needs reps, because they're not doing anything next year. Like, I get it. I know that the Miami Heat is an 8 seed, just made it to the NBA Finals, and it's very easy to turn things around in the NFL. It is. It's well documented. You could take a leap from bottom of the barrel to a division winner. Very rarely do you see bottom of the barrel to the Super Bowl in one season. So that's not in the conversation for me. It's not. If Minshew leads you to a South title, that's awesome, but it doesn't help what this franchise is going to look like 5 years from now. Unless what you're saying and what you're pushing back on, which I agree with, he's genuinely not ready because he's not understanding Shane Steichen's offense. He's not understanding exotic looks from defenses. He really does need to sit back for a year. Like, those are two different scenarios where I'm okay with Minshew and where I'm not.
Yeah, I still don't think he would sit the entire season. It's just, to me, does he start week 1? Sure. You know, that's the big thing. And I think people kind of harp on that. Like, week 1, he should be in there. If he's not in there week 1, but he's in there week 5 or 6 or whatever, it's fine. It is totally okay. I understand.
Well, what would be the point of that to you? That's my biggest thing. Because if it's 3 to 5 games, like, what would need to be the scenario if someone asked, or you, for example, on the beat asked, hey, Shane, we're here week 3. You haven't mentioned a clear timeline yet on Anthony Richardson, and you asked him why. What would you expect that answer to be?
I think it would have to be just understanding of the offense, how to read defenses, things like that. And again, you get as many reps as you can during practice. You're going to watch a bunch of film. But to me, it goes back to maybe how difficult the job is as a coach and as a GM. You have to balance the fact that you have a bunch of guys in your locker room who you're telling you have to be the best to go out there and play. And so you cannot throw a guy out there who isn't your best option, or at least not close to it. You know, again, I think the gap has to be reasonable. I don't expect him to be better than Gardner Minshew, week 1 and then for the entire season. I'm not saying that. But it can't be to the point where everyone knows in the locker room you're putting the guy out there who is not ready, and is not going to give us the best chance to win. And I understand that the best chance to win is kind of a nuanced thing this year because of where they are and what they did at the quarterback position. However, I have a hard time looking at DeForest Buckner, looking at Grover Stewart, looking at Zaire Franklin, looking at these guys and saying, no, I get it.
That's a valid point, but that's where you and I disagree. But it's a valid
I know,
point.
but I'm saying this as a team and as a GM.
Right.
You can't, I love you, Jimmy Cook, but you're not walking in the locker room looking at these guys in the eyes and saying, hey, we have to, you guys go out there and play really hard. We're going to just put this guy out there who maybe isn't quite ready yet. Not saying he hasn't earned it or hasn't put in the work. To me, the gap just can't be enormous. And if it is, I won't even say enormous. I feel like that's a little rude. If it's significant to the point where you can't really sway it back to being a reasonable
It's a disservice to the team.
That's what I'm saying. It's in way less words.
One thing I want to add here that both of you guys have seemingly to agreed on in terms of the aspect of Minshew being in there versus Richardson is the fact that if he's struggling to read defenses, well, here's my counter argument to that. That's a repetition thing. Like you can learn on film on what's going to happen, but until you're there in that setting, in that moment as a quarterback on the field, I don't think you're going to properly be able to assess or diagnose a defense until you actually see it with your own eyes. Because it's one thing from seeing it like like on a video game or something like that, and then going out there and doing it in real life, because you just need that real life experience, that firsthand experience to learn from that, which is why I would stand more on the side of you try to get him out there as soon as you possibly can in terms of he's ready. So to me, it's all it comes down to really is the playbook is being able to understand the system and being able to fully understand like checks at the line of scrimmage and things like that. Because if Shane Steichen is half the coach that we think he is, then he's going to put Anthony Richardson in a position to succeed. He's going to build the offense around Anthony Richardson. He's not going to build it to how he wants it. He'll build it to help the quarterback, like he said numerous times already.
Yeah, you know what? I actually think that's a great point that you made. And then my only pushback to that would, again, be if it's just not clicking enough for you to really put him out there and even learn on the fly. That's my only thing. Correct. I'm not even saying that Gardner Minshew, Anthony Richardson wouldn't be able to learn. I'm just saying if there is a possibility where he's really struggling to pick up the offense and things like that. And again, I don't want to understate how difficult NFL offense is, even if it is tailored to you. I imagine that the playbook is a little bit bigger than the one in Gainesville. And so if that's the case, I'm just saying don't put him out there. If there's a clear disconnect, not saying that there is one right now, there will be one. I'm just saying it's a possibility. So we'll see.
But this is, and to go back to Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner, because again, like I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't understand or respect the hell out of the work and the amount of time that they have put in to their NFL careers. There's also a bigger picture here, though, that are they going to be here in 5 years? Like when Anthony Richardson is in theory at the height of his development and really in that conversation, again, I know it's massively in theory, but if he's in the conversation of a top 10, top 5 quarterback in this league, are they really here? Is it really worth one season or half a season more? But that's not my bigger conversation I want to have with you. My bigger conversation is that there's a difference between how a veteran would interpret this, and I want to get your thoughts on this. If you throw out a quarterback because he's genuinely not ready, not a repetition thing, but he's not ready, but he's the rookie and you want to put him out there. As a veteran, I'd be upset. If you put him out there because he needs reps, you think he's going to be really good, but that's what's holding him back, with the understanding we could go 9-8 one path, or we could go 6-11 on another, and one involves a playoff spot and one's involved missing the postseason, but growth for your rookie quarterback. I at some point have to have a meeting and a conversation with my veterans and be like, look, we're not intentionally trying to tank, but this is not, we're not a Super Bowl team this year. And if there's pushback, legitimate pushback, you sell high and you trade Buckner. That's a tough conversation. We're still months away from that happening, but there's enough mutual respect, to your point, with the front office and the veterans on this team, where if they're not on board with maybe 2 less wins and a miss out on the playoffs, but a growth year for your rookie quarterback, then you're on different career timelines and tough conversations have to be had.
I do think you make a good point in that regard, and that is something that they have to weigh. I know Grover Stewart's going into the final year of his contract. Right. Buckner has 2 years left, so obviously you want to, if you're not going to keep him around long term, you have to get something in return for him.
And I'm not saying I want that. It's just
it's
a
reality. It's an option, and I know Kevin Pritchard over on the Pacers side always says optionality.
Right.
And so that's what the Colts are weighing as well, is optionality. And so these are all things that are all hypothetical and, theoretical right now. However, I just think that, again, there's so many decisions to be made within that one decision of who's going to be the quarterback. And then to a larger point, which I think we can agree on, is my thing is when you put him out there, he's out there for good.
Yeah,
that's my biggest thing.
There's no pullback.
Yeah, don't throw him out there and then you realize, oh my gosh, he's not ready. You didn't vet it enough.
No.
He's in over his head. Now we're going to pull him back and then put Gardner Minshew back, and you can't do that. We've been through that last season, actually, where the quarterback kept changing every few weeks and it was pretty much just chaos. So, again, you want to be able to hand the keys off to him, whether it's week 1, week 4, week 6. I do think he plays and starts this season before the second half of the season. I would be shocked if that didn't happen. However, again, you want to put him out there, and when you do, this is it. This is who we're rolling with, and this is who we're going to stick with.
You look at how to break a quarterback 101, and from every range of confidence, development, to everything, it is give him the reins and then pull it back. No, that's not a game I want to play unless it's like injuries are different. But that's a whole other conversation. But if it is, hey, no, you're struggling, we're pulling you back, that's a recipe for disaster.
And a point we've all glossed over: protect him. So again, if you can't protect, I get it. Like, they really believe in Tony Sperano Jr. They haven't really made too many changes to their offensive line. That is A-okay. If you believe in this guy to really up that group. But if you don't, that is one unit we're going to look at and say, you didn't do enough to make them better. And if that's the case, then the calculation about when you put the quarterback in becomes even trickier, because you have to protect him. You cannot have the same offensive line performance that you had last season, this season with a rookie quarterback, and expect him to learn the offense, get better with his mechanics and all those things, while he's also, under siege every single play. I mean, the Colts gave up 60 sacks last season, the second most in the NFL. You do not want to see that happen. I believe the Bears are number 1. And again, you just see teams with quarterbacks that run for their lives. Number 1, they don't win many games. Number 2, none of them stay healthy. So you want to keep the kid healthy when you put him in there. And also, you want to be able to, have him actually read defenses rather than running around and, being scared that he's not going to have the right protection.
I want to expand on the offensive line and go a little bit deeper where Anthony Richardson could have good habits or bad habits form, and the caution that James just outlined there. We'll have that discussion when we return. Still to come as well. Matt Verderame going to join us of SI.com. Nate Atkins of the Indy Star covers the Colts. Sam Amico of Hoops Wire gets ready for the NBA Finals, which gets started tomorrow between the Nuggets and the Heat. But Anthony Richardson and that O-line, we'll dissect that a little bit when we return on the Fan Midday Show.
Together,
Fan Midday Show on a Wednesday. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison. Still to come, top of the hour, Matt Verderame of SI.com and SI Now, NFL staff writer there. Does a great job covering all things NFL at the national level. Nate Atkins going to join us bottom of the 1 o'clock hour, covers the Colts for the Indy Star. Sam Amico of hoopshype.com will get us set for the NBA Finals. But as we were discussing in our last segment, this conversation about the right and the wrong of not even necessarily starting Richardson at a particular moment in the season, but the disservice that could be done to him in his development versus the disservice to some of the veterans in the Colts locker room that are hungry, that don't want to be a part of a rebuild or a retool. We'll, of course, go into that a little bit more, as you would expect, and as all of our shows will, between now and week 1. But you brought up an interesting point, James, before we went back out to break, regarding the offensive line. And I was talking with a couple of buddies who are big-time Colts fans after the draft and in follow-up conversations since then. And he has, in case you missed this in the combine or the other hype train that was paraded around Anthony Richardson, he has God-given abilities from an athletic standpoint that no quarterback has ever had before. That's not to say anything other than the dude's built. Like, he is just a monster in terms of just the way he's constructed. They talked about with Victor Wembanyama on the NBA side of things, how if you built somebody in a lab, this is how you'd build him. Oh, in terms of just if you wanted to all out, like I think of a quarterback I would have designed when I was playing Madden and trying to go through like the rookie rises within dynasty mode, this is the type of quarterback that I would build, because the fact that not only does he have the ability to launch it deep, but he can go take off and run and go get you big yardage. Then you add him in there with a back like Jonathan Taylor, it makes the potential for what this offense could do very tantalizing. But you mentioned the offensive line and the job and the stress on the shoulders of Tony Sperano Jr. and the expectation of this line to be better than last year, which isn't really saying much. You mentioned next to just the Bears gave up the most sacks of any team in the National Football League, and we're right up there in that conversation throughout the season. My biggest concern, we've mentioned everything about repetition. We mentioned everything about Anthony Richardson and his ability to comprehend and understand the ins and outs of this offense, is if the offensive line is not up to snuff. On the one hand, you'd think, well, that sack number is going to go down. He's got legs. He can scramble. He can go pick up a first down. He can move on the run. It'll be fine. He has a gift to the point that you want him to use that instinctually when he feels legitimate pressure. Not instinctively because he doesn't trust his offensive line.
Exactly.
And if that is what occurs, we go through a no-no list of bad habits we don't want in the rookie quarterback. For someone with his two-way game, that is near the top, if not the top of the list of something you do not want to see as this rookie season unfolds, regardless of when he starts.
Absolutely. I think that's rule number 1, quite frankly, is just making sure that he's not panicking. He's not back there making decisions that are done because you're not processing and you're pre-reacting. And you see some of that last season, I thought, with Matt Ryan. Obviously, they're two different players, but there was a point where I think we all kind of saw that he was anticipating getting hit. So even when the pocket was clean, granted, part of that is on the offensive line, not being able to sustain solid blocking to protect him, that even when they did do it occasionally, he was throwing it, before he got hit, or not stepping into throws and things like that because he was so afraid of getting hit again. And so you talk about habits being made. That was a habit that Matt Ryan developed a little bit in his 15th season, I believe. And this is a guy who had seen everything in the NFL. And so you don't want a guy in year 1 to get off on that foot, because I do think that just as much as you want to build good habits, it's like with anything in life, it's easier to build the bad habits because those are the ones you don't have to think as much about. And so, again, I think that that's a huge thing. And I've been on them about this offensive line. Feel free to prove me wrong, but I am a little bit cautious because they didn't really upgrade. I get that Blake Freeland was a good pickup, someone who actually got some first-team reps because Braden Smith was out. We were at OTAs. So he's showing something. But right guard, are you sure it's Will Fries? Are you sure you're okay with that unit up front? And you're that much, inclined to believe in Tony Sparano Jr. and what he can do. And quite honestly, I was surprised that Chris Strasser lasted the entire season last year. That was very shocking to me considering how much turnover was happening and how poor that unit played. And so we'll see. And I also know that Chris Ballard was disgusted with the lack of toughness that we saw from that unit, particularly when we were in New York or New Jersey, because the Giants are frauds. They don't play in New York. I'm going to keep saying that.
MetLife and just move on.
MetLife.
I don't want your mentions being full of New Yorkers and New Jerseyans coming at you.
No, quick side note, I posted a TikTok of my day covering the Giants, and I remember saying, New Year in New York, because it was a New Year's Day game, and I had a bunch of Buffalo fans in my comments like, no, the only team that plays in New York is us. And I was like, fair enough, let me get my lie off for TikTok, thank you. And then we moved on, made peace at that. But I do think, again, you have to make sure that unit is up to par, and you can't be in a position where you look at where you were last year and you're saying the same thing. Oh, I bet on this person, it didn't work out, or that was short-sighted. No, we all knew this, to me, last season was arguably your weakest unit. And so you have to find a way to make that unit better. I don't care what it is, but at the same time, if it's not maybe upgrading that personnel, Tony Sparano Jr., you are going to have a lot riding on you in your first season in Indianapolis.
You mentioned Tony Sparano Jr. because even though he took this job, and there's high expectations, particularly for what he was able to do with the Giants last year, a bounce-back year across the board for that line, for Saquon Barkley, for Daniel Jones. He wasn't solely responsible for all of it, but got the job done.
Give him all the credit.
We can give him any accolades that we want. But you bring that up, and I don't know if this is as strong of a question for you as much as it is I want to get the pulse of the fan. And in this particular instance, I'm talking about our resident fan behind the board in Eddie Garrison. So, Eddie, I pose this to you because I was thinking about this yesterday as well. I know this is a dark road, but it's also a real road. If the offensive line shows no improvement or minimal improvement from last season, whose fault is it? Is it the offensive line's fault? Is it Sparano Jr.'s fault, like James and I are kind of discussing here? Or is it Chris Ballard's fault? Because he's the one that's doled out these extensions. He's the one that's gone another offseason without feeling a need to aggressively revamp the offensive line. He has formulated the boys in the trenches. And if it is him, what is done about it? Because my belief at this point, and it can change in an instant, right? As an owner, you have all the power in the world with personnel decisions and where this team goes. But there's a thought of a new lease on life for Chris Ballard when you have a first-year head coach in this building, because you don't want to fully press the reset button on hoping there's a perfect match between general manager and coach. Where do we end up placing the blame if there's regression? Because I agree with James, there's a lot of pressure on Tony Sparano Jr., but I would also argue that some of it, and this has been discussion for years, goes on Ballard. But he is now in this new, it is a rebuild. I'm sorry, okay? At DJ Cook, if you're mad at me, I apologize. It is a rebuild. He's the architect of this rebuild, but he's also the architect of what is present on the foundation right now.
I would definitely, if they regress this year, I would put the blame on Chris Ballard, because then that would prove to me that last year wasn't a fluke. To me, when I think about last year, sure, you can point to the offensive line as the weakest link, like James said, but to me, I think the weakest link was the coaching staff. The coaching staff, post-firing of Marcus Brady and Frank Reich, atrocious. Look at the scheme. Look at the way they were running routes offensively from the wide receiver position. They put that offensive line in a very disadvantageous position because there was no spacing for those wide receivers to operate, leading to more hits, leading to more pressure on the quarterback. Now, you already mentioned it with Anthony Richardson being a more mobile quarterback. You can do a lot of different things. We talked to Kwity Paye.
That number is going to drop.
The number will drop, but you talked to Kwity Paye 2 weeks ago with Lara Overton, and he talked about what you have to account for as an edge rusher with a guy who's mobile. You can't instantly go after the quarterback because he's not sitting in the pocket. You have to be able to keep your eyes upfield and see where he's going. So I think that's going to lead to a little bit more time, and I think with Shane Steichen, it's going to get the ball out of the hands of Richardson like that really quick and into the guys that are on the outside. But if the offensive line fails this year, I think it would fall back on Chris Ballard because of the neglect to really add some competition up front. And the other part of this, too, that I want to hit on, Jimmy, is the fact that, like, when you look at Ryan Kelly, you look at Braden Smith, and you look at Quentin Nelson, those are your three returners that are getting paid to be top of their position. I think the guy that has the most scrutiny right now and who's under the most pressure is Ryan Kelly, because of how far he has really regressed over the past couple of seasons. He's the guy that, he's in charge of a lot of things at the line of scrimmage of being in the center. And if you're getting pressure on your quarterback in the face from your center position, that is like the worst compared to the blind side, because he has nowhere to escape if there is pressure coming directly at him, because those edge rushers will be on the outside and they'll be able to contain. Next thing you know, you're getting in for a bigger loss than any other.
James, to re-clarify things, I'm very open about this as the resident Chiefs fan here. For you growing up, was it the Bears? Is that right? Or
yep,
no?
It was the Bears growing up.
So naturally, you would still fall into some capacity. When you look at the similar avenues that they've been in, you kind of look at a preview window, if you will, of what the Colts are going to have to experience to some extent. We had this discussion on Friday. I feel strongly confident that at nearly every position group on offense, the Colts as they stand right now are better than anything the Bears have had with Justin Fields from a collective standpoint. Meaning, what you highlighted about Anthony Richardson and bad habits, the Colts on paper, I feel better about their offensive line than what was protecting Justin Fields in Chicago. That's not, to be clear, we just mentioned the numbers. Who led the NFL in sacks given up last year?
The Bears.
Who was second?
The Colts.
So what are we really talking about in terms of like a really strong improvement? But where the Colts were expected to be was not, oh, hey, Chicago, what's going on? Yeah, we let our quarterback get murdered too. It's great.
Yeah.
What a great time to be around. That's not something that you want on your plate. How Fields is going to look now with a real offensive weapon or two out there with him is
a better
line is a fast forward button to a worst case scenario for the Colts if the offensive line lets Anthony Richardson down and they start him right away. When you look at the Bears, and I think nationally too, there's no real regret that they started Fields when they did.
Mm-mm.
But a lot of that can't be fully answered until you see him with a real offensive line. Is he still having bad habits from panic, happy feet, worry, and trust issues that he had with last year's group? That's another thing that you're weighing with Anthony Richardson as a rookie, because it's not just a one-year window. You're having to map this out over the course of a young quarterback's development.
Absolutely, and I think with Justin Fields, back home, a lot of Bears fans, they were concerned, like, is he going to hold up? He's getting lit up every week, taking big hits, and I know he had some shoulder things last year, and those are the types of hits where you're like, one really bad one could change everything for your franchise. And I just want to point this out with Anthony Richardson. I get that when you look at him, he looks like he's indestructible. He looks like Superman. He looks like Iron Man. He looks like all the men with superpowers. I guess word to Jim Irsay. But I'm looking at his injury history right here. He had a grade 2 hamstring strain in 2021 when he was in college at Florida. He also had a meniscus tear in 2021 November at Florida, which he said originated in high school, and it got worse as he went through college. Had to have arthroscopic knee surgery, according to the Athletic art draft guru Dane Brugler. And then he also had a concussion, which that's just a football thing. I'm not dismissing the significance of concussions. However, that tends to happen obviously fairly often in the sport because of just the nature of it. But again, when it comes to his body itself, you can't just assume that because he's big and fast and strong, he won't get hurt, because need I remind, maybe I should just avoid this entirely, but there is a quarterback not too long ago who wore a Colts jersey, who was big, strong, really athletic, and his body didn't hold up because he took a pounding. And so, again, I just want to make sure that as much as you want to praise Anthony Richardson for what he can do physically, you still don't want to put him in situations where he's taking a bunch of hits, because one of those hits could change his career, change your franchise, and things like that. So obviously you want him to be protected as much as possible.
Where should expectations be tabled or maybe reined in a bit when you look at where we've set the bar for what Tony Sperano Jr. was able to do? And he's at a very, very long NFL career, but highlighting specifically what he did in New York this past year. You see similar situations of a running back in Saquon Barkley who was looking for a massive leap forward. Jonathan Taylor, similar boat, looking for a return to his form. Didn't have the same major injury issues that Saquon Barkley did, but still battled through it, and a lot of that can be attributed to the offensive line, not only letting the quarterback down, but letting Jonathan Taylor down at times last year.
Yeah, I think that, to me, the bar, maybe I'm being generous, is just be average. You know, you don't tell your team as a coach, go out there and be average. But that's what I expected at minimum last year, and they weren't average. They were pretty bad, one of the worst offensive lines in the league.
There's a fine line between 14th and 31st in terms of ranking an offensive line.
Exactly. So if they're middle of the pack, you know, and again, just giving everyone on offense a chance to do their job, that's okay. I don't expect them to, you know, like you said, go from last to first as far as their offensive line play or something like that, because to me, you would have to change personnel and things like that. But if you have this group and you're able to tweak some things, get more out of them, to me, on paper, that unit up front should at least be average in the NFL. And at that point, you're not doing something that I think will put Jonathan Taylor or Richardson at a disadvantage because they're running for their lives every single play.
That's James Boyd. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Still to come, a conversation with Matt Verderame of SI.com. Nate Atkins of the Indy Star covers the Colts. We'll have his perspective on all this and what he's looking out for as Colts OTAs resume. Sam Amico of hoopshype.com gets us ready for the NBA Finals. We'll look at the storyline of Miami versus Denver. You should obviously watch it because it's the finals, but is there a real watch intrigue of, man, Miami could really make this a series? We're going to go full scale into that with him at the top of the 2 o'clock hour. When we return, we'll look briefly at this lead up to the NBA Finals, continue our Colts discussion as well here on the Fan Midday Show.
Hey,
Jimmy Cook and James Boyd with Eddie Garrison here in the DriveHubler.com studios. Have a conversation with Matt Verderame of SI.com right around the corner at the top of the hour, well as a Colts look with Nate Atkins at 1:30. Top of the 2 o'clock hour, Sam Amico going to join us of Hoops Hype.
Hoops Wire.
Appreciate that. Hoopswire.com. My apologies there for the NBA Finals lead up. And we mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but you finally have it set in stone now with Denver and Miami. And after the show, you and I, along with Eddie, were joking about a pathway potentially for Miami to make this interesting. And some of this is a Captain Obvious statement, but it's also just imperative for the dynamic of this series. If you're able to take game one, if you're Miami, because that's the one that off the board, whether it's Vegas, whether it's pundits, whoever, is not expecting Miami to take game one based on a number of factors. The perhaps talent gap with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, the fact they just played a 7-game series, the altitude in Denver, all of that. It's all this cocktail of potential disaster for the Miami Heat. But if you're able to take that game, despite all of that, all of a sudden it changes the full dynamic in my mind of what this series could be. I'm not saying they win, but from a fan or a viewership standpoint, let's be honest, you the listeners, all three of us, that's all I really care about. I want to see a great series. I don't really have a major rooting interest in this one. Might be some listeners still have frustrations towards the Miami Heat of a decade ago. That's fine. Most of the players that were on that team are not there anymore outside of Udonis Haslem and Eric Spoelstra, the coach. Outside of that, though, I just want a great series. A lot of it's going to start with what Miami is able to show in game one.
Absolutely. I think this is their best shot to steal one because I get the fatigue factor when it comes to having not played, having played a 7-game series and really having to go down to the wire to get it done. However, you're probably still in rhythm. That's a factor. So maybe you can catch the Nuggets sleeping for a quarter and a half, 2 quarters, and, steal a game. And so the best part about all of this to me is always you have to play the games. Because to me, even though I picked the Lakers to beat the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals, I don't think anyone seriously thought it was going to be a sweep. But that's why you play the games, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so if there's any team that is going to take advantage of any opportunity, it probably will be the Heat, because that is what they've done so far to get to the finals. It's catch a break and then take every break and use it to your advantage to try to do something special.
On that same note, though, for Denver, and it feels so weird, right? Because Denver's been getting disrespected the entire season. Enter Mike Malone comment here. And for Miami, they've been doubted going into each one of these series for a variety of different factors, the prevailing one being they're an 8 seed. They've dealt with injuries. Eventually, it's going to come back and bite them. And they came out and punched in the mouth right away, pretty much from the onset of each one of these playoff games, or which one of these playoff series. Now, I get it, they dropped 3 in a row to Boston, but shocked everybody from a national perspective when they went up 3-0. I feel like there is a unhealthy level of doubt towards Miami, and even though as great as Denver is, an unhealthy overreaction for what Denver could do to the Heat, an overcorrection rather, because of how disrespectful that we've been at times to this Denver team. Maybe not us, because we've, I think, had a healthy respect for them, but nationally, it feels like there's somewhat of an overcorrection now because, oh no, we're down to 2 teams. We can't pencil in the Lakers here anymore. Oh, we can't
right.
take the Warriors. It's really the Nuggets now.
I do think that that's a bit of a factor, but to me, it's still the number 1 seed in the West,
sure,
the better conference against the 8 seed in the East. And I get that seeds don't matter at this point because it's the last 2 teams standing, but I have a hard time seeing the Nuggets struggle mightily against a team that they're just better than, and they've been better than throughout the season. They've had a better regular season, obviously, a better playoff run up until this point. And to me, it comes down to just how big they are. I've been saying this for what feels like a week and a half. They're just a huge team. They don't have these little guards out there, these little wings out there that are sort of specialists in their roles. Like I know that Duncan Robinson is a shooter. That's what he does best. He's not really a great defender. Same thing with Max Strus and things like that. But with Denver, they don't have too many specialists, meaning they have one trait that's all they can do. Because even Michael Porter Jr., when he's engaged, and Eddie will laugh at this because Lord have mercy, can he stay engaged? Because he needs to stay engaged. But if he is, he's still 6'10", and so even if he doesn't try very hard, he can play defense. So to me, they're the bigger team, the more talented team, and they have the best player in the series in Nikola Jokic.
Definitely the best player. I think Jimmy Butler's going to try to battle in like a word as this thing goes on. Maybe second best and so bad, depending on how the rest of the players do. And who knows if Caleb Martin continues his fully joke statement here, MJ-like trajectory. Maybe they can pull off some surprises in game one in the series. That's James Boyd. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us here as well. We'll step aside, head to Sports Illustrated when we come back, as Matt Verderame of SI.com and SI Now will take us through the national perspective on the Colts and the arms race that is at quarterback in the AFC. That conversation when we return on the Fan.
Hey, it's JMV.
Fan.
Inside the DriveHuber.com studios on a Wednesday here in Indianapolis is the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison behind the ones and twos. Thanks for spending part of your afternoon with us here on the Fan. We've mentioned it throughout the offseason, and it's been a real conversation point for the better part of the last 2 years. It's an arms race at quarterback within the AFC. The Colts hoping to one day be a part of that conversation, but a long road to go. At least they have, in theory, their franchise quarterback in Anthony Richardson. To take us big picture amongst the AFC, we're joined now by Matt Verderame of SI Now, NFL staff writer, does a great job covering the league as a whole, and also formerly of Fansided and formerly of Arrowhead Addict. Matt, I'm a massive Chiefs fan, so I've appreciated your work over the years, and very happy for you making the jump to Sports Illustrated.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm glad that they haven't seen fit to get rid of me yet. So things are going good.
I'm glad to hear that. We kind of alluded to it a little bit there at the start. I want to first look big picture within the NFL and everything that's happened this offseason. Chiefs are obviously still at the top of the mountain, but when you look around at the moves that have been made this offseason and the established quarterbacks that are already there, plus adding the Jets in there with Aaron Rodgers, is there a shift amongst the power-making moves that are made to keep up with the likes of Kansas City, Cincinnati, and Buffalo?
I don't think, putting aside Rodgers for a second, because obviously the Jets, big upgrade there over what they had at quarterback last year. Putting the Jets to the side, this was a really unimpactful offseason from the standpoint of free agency was atrocious this year compared to most years. Right? I mean, there just were not a lot of guys who changed addresses, who really moved the needle. I mean, I like Javon Hargrave as much as the next guy, but does Javon Hargrave going to the Niners make them a favorite any more than they already were? Maybe a little bit, but I don't know that it was a ton, and he was probably the best free agent out on the market. I think that the Jets are clearly better. They should at least be a playoff team, although the AFC, that's no easy feat. I will say this. I think the most underrated addition to any team this offseason is Vic Fangio in Miami. He is going to make that defense good, along with Jalen Ramsey. And if that defense can play and Tua is healthy, they're a problem. Like, there's a real case to be made that they're the best team in that division, which is, again, a very good division. But I don't think there are these teams other than maybe Miami and the Jets. You'll look at this, say they made a huge move. There's going to be so much better or worse than they were a year ago.
Matt, when you look at where the Colts are, and me and Jimmy have argued over this, and he's a Chiefs fan, I have to remind him that we're in Indianapolis and we have to talk about the Colts. But
I've lived these quarterback struggles, okay? I understand what Indianapolis is going through.
When you look at what the Colts have to weigh as far as bringing Anthony Richardson along, when to start him, things like that, how do you view that whole decision that will obviously paint the picture of their season?
So, look, Shane Steichen comes in from Philadelphia, and he brings with him Gardner Minshew, who's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. I would argue he's even probably better than a handful of starters around the league. He can come in and be a stabilizing force, and he's going to be a great guy in the room, going to help Richardson. Perfect guy for them. I think that was a great signing. I think he's going to be in there. He'll probably start the season as the number one guy. And then, look, if you're Steichen, you're going to kind of put a little bit at a time on Richardson's plate until you get to a point at some juncture in the year, or maybe if the team isn't playing particularly well, or you feel like Richardson's really made the leap when you're watching him in practice, maybe you go, okay, you know what, this is a good time to make the change. I really think that Steichen and Richardson are going to be very, very good together. I don't know that this year is going to be that year because Steichen's never been a head coach, and Richardson did not throw 900 passes between college and high school. His talent is immense, but it is a big jump to make for anybody. I don't care if you were a 3 or 4 year starter in college. You're talking about a guy in Richardson who, look, when you watch his film, it's evident how much he can do. But I think there's a lot of growing to be done. I could see the Colts being a team that's at the bottom of the standings this year, but yet you walk away from it by the end of the season going, you know what? Like the coach, really like the quarterback. Its future's really bright, even if the wins aren't necessarily there this season.
Matt, that's been the ongoing conversation that we've had in regard to some of the veterans within the Colts locker room that, I get it, guys like DeForest Buckner started their career in San Francisco, and he doesn't want to be a part of another rebuild. He doesn't like that word. And I get that. I understand that there's a balance of keeping everybody happy in the locker room, also understanding the real trajectory the Colts are on. They're not in a boat like Miami is, like Buffalo is, like Cincinnati, like Kansas City. They're 2 or 3 tiers beyond that, trying to figure out their own blueprint. When you look at Anthony Richardson and you look at the decision Shane Steichen is going to have to make, assuming he grasps Shane Steichen's offense to a point where they look at what you just mentioned, the lack of reps in college, he needs reps, real-time work's what's going to help him. Let's start him week 1, week 2, week 3, whatever it is. The decision on Minshew can't be, well, he might win us 3 more games this year at the cost of development of Richardson, right?
No question. And that's why, look, to me, I know maybe some Colts fans don't want to hear this, or maybe some have already kind of accepted this. Their success this year, to me, has nothing to do with their record. Now, look, they just shock everybody and they're good. That's great. But I look at the Bears last season. Now, the Bears ended up with the number 1 overall pick, but I'm based out here not too far outside Chicago. Everybody here is thrilled to death and can't wait to watch the Bears this year because Justin Fields is like he can really play. And there's a thought process of like, all right, finally. Now you want to talk about teams needing a franchise quarterback. They haven't had a franchise quarterback since the advent of television. Okay, so they've been dying for a quarterback. But that team was terrible last year. They were in a lot of the games. Fields really looked like he could play. And if you're the Bears, you went in the offseason, all right, look, got a ton of cap space, let's make some moves. And I think for the Colts, I don't care if you go 4-13. I mean, if Richardson plays, let's say he plays 10 games, and he really looks, even if he's wrong, but he really, like, you're watching the game, you go, all right, this guy can play. Like, this guy's got some things to learn, but he's big time. And you feel like Steichen can coach, I don't care what their record is. Like, at that point, that's a successful season. Now, maybe it's not in the eyes of a guy like a Leonard or a Nelson or a Buckner. Okay, I get that. It shouldn't be successful for them. But that's reality for where the Colts are. It's the same thing for the Houston Texans, by the way. I'd say the same thing for them. If Stroud's good and Ryans looks like he can coach, I don't care if they win 3 games. That's fine. That's what you need to build off of. That's better than winning 6 games and going, yeah, I don't know if Richardson can play.
Matt, I saw you made a list of the top 10 quarterbacks right now in the NFL, which I'm sure everyone in your mentions and in your comments agreed with you because you're never wrong and you can never change your mind. So, when it comes to week 16, one of these quarterbacks maybe isn't where they're supposed to be. They're going to remind you, hey, you had him there. But when you look at that list and where you had Trevor Lawrence at number 6, what was it about last season that showed you and gave you something to believe in? Because I do believe that it feels like this is the Jaguars' division here in the AFC South, especially with the addition of Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, and James, you know how it goes. I'm sure about 8 people bookmarked that story. They're just waiting, which is fine. Good for them. Enjoy that. Look, first of all, I think, Jacksonville clear and away should be the division winner. I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, And by the way, that should give hope for everybody else in that division because Jacksonville was picking first 2 years in a row, okay? And then they got a quarterback and a coach, and boom, they're a team that is going to be competing in the AFC. I put Lawrence at 6 because I don't think you could make a case realistically that he's ahead of Mahomes, he's ahead of Burrow, he's ahead of Allen, he's ahead of Hurts, and I have Herbert ahead of him, I believe, was set. You can make a case for him or Herbert. You can also make a case by like Lamar. Lamar could absolutely be there. Like if you want to put Lamar ahead of him, that's fine. I have no problem with that. All those guys can get really close. I thought Lawrence, it was just really impressive to me how he basically didn't have a rookie season. I mean, I've never seen a bigger embarrassment at head coach in the NFL than what Urban Meyer was. And so you then bring in Doug Peterson, of course, who's a real coach. And all of a sudden, Lawrence goes out and he's throwing 25 touchdown passes. His interceptions are way down. And Jacksonville had a good supporting cast from last year, but it wasn't outrageous. It wasn't like you looked at them and just went, oh, my God, they've got 7 Pro Bowlers on offense. I think he's really a guy who this year I think could throw for 4,500 yards, 32 to 35 touchdowns. It'd just be one of those guys. And look, in the AFC, I mean, you need to have that guy. Yeah. If you don't have that guy, you have no chance. I mean, you are not even going to be a playoff team. You look at that conference. I mean, you've got how many guys that realistically, if they played their best, right, that guy could be a first or second team All-Pro. I mean, 7 of them. So I think Lawrence and that Jacksonville team, there are still weaknesses. I still worry about their defense and offensively. I worry about the line a little bit. But in that division, I think they're going to win a lot of games. And they also play the NFC South, which is another division they might win a lot of games out of. So Jacksonville is going to have, I think, a very good record.
And just to follow up on this list, I know one of the things that Colts fans have latched onto with Shane Steichen is what he was able to do with Jalen Hurts. And everyone looks at last season because that was the MVP caliber season and he was, an all-pro, those things. However, how much do you think the 2021 season could be a blueprint for what he might be able to do with Richardson in his first season?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. And look, I wrote a big piece when I was back at Fanside of last July, and I talked to a lot of people in the Eagles organization, and basically, I thought they had a really good offseason. The funny thing was, I actually had some people fairly high up in the building say to me, look, make it clear that we're not ready to go to the Super Bowl yet. This is not that. And, of course, then they immediately went to the Super Bowl. And so I still somehow undersold them because they undersold themselves. But the point is, they didn't even expect Hurts to make the leap that he made last year. But what they did try to do was they went out and they were very intentional about trying to make sure that he had every opportunity to succeed. They went out and they got A.J. Brown. That line is really top-notch. They made sure that they were going to be able to evaluate Jalen Hurts based on really good surroundings. And I think for the Colts, this year is probably going to be more like that 2021 year where you watched Hurts and you said, okay, I don't know what he can be, but there's something there with this kid. He can throw the ball. He's got some wheels on him. clearly the mental side of it's there. That's no issue. And so even though the Eagles that year, they'd be the first to tell you, like, they beat nobody that year. They got in the playoffs because they beat a bunch of bad teams, and then they got smoked by Tampa in the playoffs. But they looked at that as, okay, this is a positive experience for us. And I think this year with Richardson, you know what? If he completes 60% of his throws, 58% of his throws, but as the year goes on, he's getting better and better, then I think it's on Ballard and company next offseason to go, all right, you know what? We got to actually spend on some receivers here. We got to really go get them some help. We've got to make sure that offensive line is back to what it was a couple of years ago, and it doesn't look anything like it looked a year ago. Like, that's where I think Steichen and Ballard and the rest of the front office and staff in Indy, they have to be able to do that so they can properly evaluate Richardson and what he's good at and what he's not good at, and not just look at it and go, well, what are you going to do? He was on his back 40% of the dropbacks.
Matt Verderame with us, covers the NFL nationally for Sports Illustrated. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Verderame. How soon before the ESPN and NFL Network alikes pick the Chargers to win the AFC West? I'm just kidding. But when you look at when you look at where rookie contracts are for quarterbacks, because that's a real window that the Colts are going to be focusing on soon, and you look at the Chargers with Justin Herbert and obviously the Bengals with Joe Burrow, how understated or overstated is the importance of excelling or spending in the right spots with that rookie contract? And then going back to the Colts with Anthony Richardson, they're going to have some decisions to make in the coming months with Jonathan Taylor, with Michael Pittman Jr. They're very much in that boat. Have the Chargers and Bengals missed the boat in that regard? And how do the Colts either avoid that or prioritize their money?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting. I haven't even written this yet, but I've talked to a bunch of agents around the league and asked them, if you represented Burrow or Herbert, what would you be looking for? Now that you've seen all these contracts, what would be your goal for a contract? And almost to a man, it was $60 million a year, which I don't know if they're going to get that, but that's going to be the goal. Now, I think Burrow probably gets a little more than Herbert, and it's going to be really fascinating with those two in particular when you factor in that those are franchises that are not exactly teams that throw around billions of dollars for fun.
Sure.
Okay, so there's a reason the Bengals named their stadium for the first time last year. I had one agent flat out tell me, like, he really believes that when they sign Burrow, it's going to take a small bank loan to make it happen. Like, that they're going to have to do it. So the point of all that is, it's a real thing. I mean, when the one thing about signing players to big guaranteed money, which, of course, when you're talking about a quarterback on a second deal who's good, I mean, you're paying huge guaranteed money. When you do that, any guaranteed money has to go in escrow at the time of signing. And so it's not just about your salary cap. It's about the cash budget for these owners. And that is a huge, huge chunk of money that's coming out right away. Now, the other side of it is, look, I think the Bengals have missed their window because Burrow's already talked about, I really want to try to do something to help set the team. We'll see if he does it. The Chargers have one of the worst cap crunches I've ever seen if you look at their cap next year. I mean, it is just bonkers, some of the numbers on their sheet. That team, they're in for a financial comeuppance, if you will. But I think for the Colts, listen, you got 5 years of cheap quarterback play, and if Richardson turns out good and you give him an extension, that first year or two, the cap number could be held down a little. But you got to prioritize right now. This next 3 to 5 years, you've got to hit on that window. Otherwise, things get a lot harder.
Absolutely. And you look at a team like Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. They kind of went through that where it's like, how much is this guy worth? How much do we pay? But now that he's back, which I always expected, I was thinking to myself, there's just no way you're ever going to become really free considering how NFL contracts are set up with the franchise tag and things like that. I believe he would have had to play the next 2 seasons on the tag to become a free agent and then be able to have more leverage. But now that he has the money, he's back, he has the playmakers around him. What do you see in store for him over there? Because we'll see them in week 3 here in Indy. Or actually at Baltimore, sorry.
They're a fascinating team because on one hand, look, you have to pay Lamar Jackson. I mean, I've always been in the camp that I understand there are some questions in terms of they flopped in the playoffs and how much do you blame him, how much do you blame the teams. I think it all goes around. I mean, you got to spread the blame. But this is a team now, like Todd Monken's coming in as their offensive coordinator. They have signed Odell Beckham. They drafted Zay Flowers. They're going to throw the football. And I'm one who says, I think, in the past, like Lamar's never thrown for 4,000 yards. Some of that's the fact that he's been hurt. Some of that's the fact that their receivers have not been good. Well, they've got a pretty interesting crew here. Now, Beckham's got to stay on the field, and Flowers has to prove he's not a bust, but this is an interesting team. The one thing I would say, though, that does worry me with Baltimore, when you pay a quarterback to that extent, that quarterback has to cover up a lot of other sins. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And that defense in Baltimore lost a lot this offseason. Peters is gone. Justin Houston is gone. They declined the option on Queen, who's still there for a year, but you would think is going to be gone after the season. Who knows? Maybe they'd move him this summer. Pierre Paul, who's a nice veteran addition, he's gone. Like, you kind of look at them and go, can Jackson elevate them in a way where they can just overcome it if that defense is 23rd in the league? I mean, can they do that? Can they play that way? Can he stay on the field for 17 games? He obviously hasn't been able to the last couple of years. So I worry that their window's closed a little bit if Jackson doesn't just unbelievably elevate them. But I've seen so much from him that obviously I wouldn't count that out. I wouldn't be shocked if he goes out and has an MVP caliber year, but they may need that from him in a great conference with a lesser defense.
Matt, when you look big picture at the AFC, post-NFL draft, post-free agency, and you obviously have your list of top 10 quarterbacks across the league, but focusing specifically on the AFC, do we see the first back-to-back since the Patriots?
It's always, look, if you said to me would I pick the Chiefs or the field, I mean, I would take the field. I think most people would. But
right.
At the same point, if you asked me to pick one team, I would probably pick Kansas City. I just think Mahomes is at a point now where if you'd like to bet against him, go ahead. I was the guy who last year was like, look, I think the Chiefs are in a little bit of a rebuild, or a reload, I guess is the better term. And I think, the Bills are the team. And I think the Bills were early, and then Von Miller got hurt, and everything kind of went sideways on them. But when you look at the Chiefs, you're just looking at a really good offensive line. Mahomes is fantastic. Andy Reid's fantastic. Defensively, they're better than people give them credit for. They've got a lot of good young players in that defense. They're really well coached at Steve Spagnuolo. They're really good on teams with Butker and Townsend. Look, I think that certainly the Bengals could beat them. The Bills are a threat. The Dolphins, I think, are a threat. Jacksonville's interesting. I don't know if I think they're a huge threat yet, but I think they're getting there. But, yeah, if I had to pick a team, I actually do think that they're comparatively to other teams who have tried to repeat, I think they're a good bet. They're loaded, and they've got the best player in the world at the most important position.
Does he have the best contract in the sport right now?
I bet the Chiefs would tell you yes.
I was going to say, because I'm like, it seems like they really hit on that contract. Mm-hmm. It gets better every year.
Well, the funny thing was, I remember talking to Lee Steinberg, who's one of his representatives. He's represented by Steinberg and Chris Cabot and so on and so forth. But I remember the year after they won their first Super Bowl. So we're talking like the combine of 2020. And he was just becoming eligible for an extension. And I actually was talking to Lee on the record. He said, hey, how are things going with the contract? They're good. And he essentially said to me, well, we got to, Mahomes has got to get paid, got to get his money. But they've got to keep some flexibility here because he wants to win. And that's what ended up happening. Where how often do you say a guy got $450 million in a contract and people are like, well, he's underpaid? But that's what happened. But he knew by signing. So for an example, like everybody's talking about DeAndre Hopkins. If the Bills go out and get DeAndre Hopkins, they are going to have to push money down the line. And they're going to have to really face a huge cap crunch next year. They already have 9 players next year making over $10 million, and Allen's making 48 against cap next year. If they push money down the cap for 2024, they're cutting real players next season. If the Chiefs want to move money around Mahomes, all they have to do is basically flip a switch. $23 million goes down the rest of his contract, but what do they care? There's 8 years left on it. I mean, so what? They're adding $3 million next year to his cap number? Like, what does it matter? It's irrelevant to them. And so it's not so much the average value. It's the length of the contract. And Mahomes knew it when he signed it. And I think, we've heard so much about this all season about, well, they've got to restructure. I got to tell you, talking to people that I know in and around that situation, that's much more of a media creation than it is a worry of either side with that. They're pretty fine with it, and they'll adjust it eventually. But that contract is proven to be worth its weight in gold for both sides, and certainly the Chiefs.
Speaking of DeAndre Hopkins, Matt Verderame, SI now taking some time with us here on the Fan Midday Show. We joked a little bit. We were out at the Speedway for Carb Day ahead of the Indy 500 about, oh man, DeAndre Hopkins, Colts have some cap space. Maybe they'll go. I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't come here because of where the franchise is at right now. But maybe money matters to him. Let's take Indianapolis out of it though, because I don't think that that's a real destination in his mind. Where is that balance with Hopkins being 30 years old? Of I want to go championship chase or I want to have another payday in my life? And if so, what are his options?
Well, I think, look, if he wants to go to Buffalo or Kansas City, the reality of that is he's not getting paid $20 million. It's just not going to happen. I would be floored if that happened. And if he wants a combination of, hey, I want to get paid, but I also want to be a pretty good team, and the Lions have a bunch of cap space. Jameson Williams is suspended for the early part of the year. Maybe that's a good fit. Goff had a great year last year. People have talked about Cleveland. Cleveland's interesting. I don't know that you'd call them a contender, but if they added Hopkins, you have him and Peoples-Jones and Amari Cooper. Okay, I mean it's not a bad team. I think for Hopkins though, if he wants to be on a team that can genuinely win the Super Bowl, I mean one of these top 5 to 8 teams, he's going to have to take a contract that's somewhat creative. Maybe it's loaded with incentives. Maybe it's a contract that they actually put a second year on it so you can kind of spread the hits out. But keep in mind, a team that acquired him via trade from the Cardinals would have been paying $19 million this year. I think it was $19.5 million, and the next year it would have been like $14.5 million. And nobody was willing to do it. So now you had to give up a pick in that sense, but you weren't giving up a big pick, and you wouldn't have had to compete with a free agency market, and still nobody did it. So my question is, I know Beckham got 15 plus, 3 in incentives. That was a lot earlier in the offseason. If Hopkins is willing to go to a bad team with a bunch of money, sure, maybe he gets more than Beckham. But if he wants to go to a team that's going to play in January, and I think that at this point in his career, you think would matter at least somewhat, he's going to have to get creative, or he's going to have to say, you know what, maybe I take less for 1 year. I load up on numbers. I load up on exposure. I play deep into the season. Maybe I get my ring, and then next year I cash in big one more time.
Matt, thank you very much for making some time with us. Seriously, even though I'll miss the localized Chiefs coverage, I know you'll still sprinkle it in on the timeline, but very happy for you with the National Leap of Sports Illustrated, and hopefully we're able to talk again down the line.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much. Anytime.
That's Matt Verderame. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Matt Verderame of SI Now. Does a great job covering the NFL nationally. And one of the larger takeaways from that conversation, as we pivot back again, as we did a couple of times over the course of that chat, you can find that wherever you get your podcast. Search the Fan Midday Show a little bit later this afternoon. The cap space situation, I know it's a word that kind of drives Colts fans nuts, but the rookie contract cap space situation and that balancing act that you have, it's a very real thing that is an outlook for 4 or 5 years from now. I get that, 3 or 4 years from now, but you're seeing it play out in Cincinnati, and you're seeing it played out in Los Angeles, and he's exactly right. It's a dangerous game the Chargers are going to have to play next year.
Absolutely, and I think for the Colts, and really any team that drafts a quarterback really high, you want to see something special from that player at least one of the years before they enter the big extension, big contract, assuming you keep that player on your roster.
On the other side of that, it was fascinating to again get the national perspective of what we kind of feel, which is that there's real optimism. If you were on the YouTube chat, you and I saw James and I pointed at each other with one or two of those answers because he kind of said both things. He acknowledged the fact that, hey, Minshew's a high-quality backup. He's going to understand Shane Steichen's system better. But he also mentioned, look at the Bears. They believe now, a year or two removed from that there's true promise for Justin Fields as he enters yet another season. Just a funny back and forth for us. And that's very much the national conversation, too, with Richardson.
Absolutely.
Really
I think that's one of the things that it's going to be an ongoing conversation for months and months and months. I'm right now. You're wrong. And that's how it is. That's how it is. That's how it goes.
Very kind of you to do that while we're up against the break. Nate Atkins of the Indy Star joins us next on The Fan.
Antler Point Golf Course.
The Fan.
Still here in the DrivePeopleLock.com studio. Like I said yesterday, I haven't been kicked out yet. You know, Jimmy and Eddie have been gracious enough to let me keep coming back, which is fun. We have my buddy Nate Atkins from Indy Star covering the Colts alongside me. Nate, how you doing?
Doing good, man. It's a gorgeous day out here in Indy, and it was nice to this morning get out to Eagle Creek State Park, go on a run, and drive by the Colts facility and have a day of not going there just to take a break this time of year. But then we'll be back out there Friday and out in the heat and seeing them practice and kind of seeing how this whole thing comes together.
So for the listeners out there, I did none of that. I slept in. I didn't get up until about 45 minutes before this show began at 12, and so quick shower and out the door. But, Nate, I guess enough about me. Quarterbacks is what we're talking about, what we're always going to be talking about. What has been your impression of Anthony Richardson so far, and maybe the gap that he has to take or leap to, you know, to kind of get ready for his rookie season?
Yeah, it's been just neat to see Anthony kind of show up, and it's like just a young kid in his first day in a new job, the first professional job, and it kind of has that feel to everything that he's done so far from, you know, when he showed up the day after the draft with, you know, all his family and friends and supporters and kind of walking through the hall kind of just wide-eyed and kind of blown away by it all. And then the point where he's sort of transitioning into being a little bit more, you know, he's like a kid off at he's gone to college, but it's still kind of that feel of a kid kind of going away from home for the first time since he grew up in Gainesville, went to Florida there, you know, kind of lived right around home. This is the first time he's really left that home area, the nest. And so, you know, just funny to hear him talk about going to Walgreens and buying deodorant and soap. And that was kind of like the way he's checked out Indianapolis so far, but then how he's kind of moved from that to blocking into, you know, getting copies of the playbook and diving into that. And, you know, even just some of the early moments of him connecting with Josh Downs and trying to build a connection there. And then all the ways he's just trying to kind of catch up in hyperspeed as a guy who, of course, we know had 13 starts in college and, you know, just turned 21 this month. So he's trying to accelerate this growth process, and it's going to be a process the entire year. But it's one of those where at least you're hopeful that, you know, he's come in with sort of that right attitude of, you know, he doesn't strike you as a guy who feels like he's made it because he was the number 4 pick in the draft. He's out here really being a perfectionist after every single throw and every rep. You know, like we said, meeting Josh Downs up in a parking lot to throw, diving into the playbook. None of it's a guarantee of anything other than that it's the kind of vibes you want to see from a guy who knows he's trying to get somewhere rather than believes he already is at that place.
Nate, how long can Anthony Richardson walk around Indy and go to Walgreens before people start to recognize him? Because I don't know how long that will last with more things coming up for fans to see and dive into and just get to know him.
I mean, you're there when we're out at practice, and it feels like you could release a video of him flat-footed throwing a ball 3 feet away to an equipment manager, and it's going to be psychoanalyzed by every fan, good and bad. So, you know, some of it he's new, and, you know, these football players are always a little different because they, you know, they play with helmets on, and there's so many of them. So I've always kind of said, like, there's other Colts players, and I say this from being out at the 500 and seeing some of them out there where they don't all get, you know, instantly recognized, but it's totally different when that player that everyone's transfixed on is the quarterback. There just ends up being a sort of obsession to, you know, him as a player, as a person. And so I think those days are over. That was kind of his first trip in, dropped in a Walgreens. I hope he enjoyed it because that was kind of like the end of the anonymity. And this is where it's just going to get really interesting to see how this young man kind of handles that, the hyperbole and scrutiny that's going to come, because we're already seeing it just with the reactions to anything said or related to him in any way, as light as it is this time of year. You know, as we get into training camp and fans are out there, as we get into the games, you know, the pendulum is going to swing so rapidly from, you know, this guy is, you know, going to get a bust in the Hall of Fame to this guy is a bust already halfway through his rookie year. And it's just going to be fascinating to see kind of how he handles that. Like I said, I think he's got a good vibe so far for some of that. I think he's been built in a certain way that makes it a little different than others. But you truly never know how this is going to go until they actually get out there and they go through it. And I think that time's coming up pretty quickly.
Nate Atkins covers the Colts for the Indy Star. Join us here on the Fan Midday Show. Nate, to build off of that, this is often an aspect of being a rookie that gets overlooked, particularly when you're a rookie that has such high expectations, like a first-round quarterback selection brings with it. Maybe this question hasn't been asked of him yet, but when you look at the importance of veteran leadership within this locker room, the importance of Gardner Minshew within that quarterback room, how does one adjust, or how will Anthony Richardson be tasked with adjusting to that, understanding to an extent that, sure, he enjoyed a lifestyle change being in Gainesville and the expectations of being in an SEC program and everybody, being on the edge of their seats for every play, but that gets up 10 notches and can kind of shell shock you when, all jokes aside, the trips to Walgreens are off the table and you're now a bona fide superstar with high expectations on your plate.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because that's what's so different than every other draft pick, every other rookie, is that you do come in with leadership expectations. We don't really see that for anybody else that they'll take. We'll never talk about how, and not this year, about how Josh Downs or Juju Brents have to become leaders. And I think the Colts had an eye on that as they sort of retooled the roster, is that they were willing to do, they didn't kind of go all in. They didn't make aggressive moves. It's sort of a treading water year, but they did keep around some guys that some thought they might trade, like Ryan Kelly, like DeForest Buckner. There are some leaders, the guys that the teammates in the locker room have looked to for a few years. They're not looking around now for who's going to come on and fill those voids of the longtime guys. Shaquille Leonard will step back in, everyone hopes, and be that guy. But it always falls in the quarterback at the end of the day. And the past 2 years, it's been fascinating to see that, because the Colts have swung, big swings in two opposite directions, one on the traits and the upside and the physical talent of Carson Wentz, and then missed a lot of that leadership, just a humongous void that really hurt that team. And they swung that total opposite direction, all for the leader and personality of Matt Ryan, and then they lost, the physical characteristics you need to really excel in a passing league. So with Anthony, they're trying to strike something in the middle while knowing that neither one of those is going to be perfect off the bat. He's not going to be this fully realized version of a dual threat quarterback who's accurate and super mobile and safe and all that. But he shows that upside. At the same time, there's no way he can be kind of an experienced, he hasn't gone through a lot of this in the NFL to be able to lead everybody in that way, yet there are parts of him that are going to have to. There's parts of him that are going to have to be that calming presence and that guy that becomes a consistent voice and really is going to end up being sort of a flag of hope that they're going to carry forward as they kind of build this passing game. You think about a passing game where, it's all receivers pretty much on rookie contracts outside of Ashton Doolin and tight ends who are very young. This is sort of a passing game they're trying to grow organically, and that's going to be around Anthony Richardson. So while he is just 21, he's never started a game. He's only started 13 games at any level above high school. He doesn't have the resume that's anything close to a leader. It's a life that he's going to be kind of thrown into, and their willingness to even entertain the idea of starting him early, split the first team reps, and maybe even start him to start the season shows that they're going to put this on him, and they're going to see how he handles it. And they've kind of built their locker room and their passing game around the idea that he doesn't have to necessarily lead the entire team, but he's got to lead a lot of it, and a lot of it is the passing game, and that's ultimately going to decide their ceiling as we go forward.
Nate, as we know in football, the game is usually decided, as cliche as it sounds, in the trenches. If you can't block, or if your defensive line is really good, that usually helps you in the game. And so when you look at where the Colts offensive line was last season, the additions, so to speak, they made this offseason, maybe not as much as I would have anticipated. How much do you think they're putting on Tony Sparano Jr.'s plate as a new offensive line coach to get that unit right and make sure that whatever quarterback is back there, they're not running for their lives like many of them were last year?
I mean, you have to say they're putting an absolute ton on it when you consider that, they've brought back all 5 starters at the end of last year. And so they drafted, Blake Freeland in the 4th round. And there's a chance, if Bernard Raimann does not take a step forward, that he could eventually step into left tackle. There's a chance, I guess, that Emil Ekiyor, the undrafted right guard out of Alabama, maybe he surprises us in camp and makes a push for the right guard spot. But right now, if things go to expectation, they're expecting to bring back the same 5 guys that finished last year. And so that, to me, is a huge indictment on what they believe in the coaches last year, the coaches that they had to maximize what was at the time the highest paid offensive line in the NFL. I think it's a line that Chris Ballard's admitted it was not very well constructed in terms of what they were trying to put into the new spots. Two guys, Matt Pryor and Danny Pincher, who had never played those positions before, and that ended up dragging down the mean quality of the other three guys they thought were stalwarts, and all of a sudden they're not stalwarts anymore. So there is an idea that, like, if you just get players at left tackle and right guard that they think at least fit those spots, that just have enough of a background there and enough of a skill set to where they can do the job without being completely out of position, that combined with with a new coaching staff, just kind of a fresh season here, and then they're just going to really change some things about the way they run the ball. For example, with Anthony Richardson, there's going to be a lot of more Eagles type elements with the QB run game. That all of a sudden gets offensive linemen playing downhill more. That's what linemen love, because that's how they really build their confidence. The problem last year was they weren't successful at that, so they didn't build that confidence. They were stuck in obvious pass situations where they were at a disadvantage, and then they were so poor in those situations that it just crushed their confidence that each time they made a mistake, often it would end in an injury to Matt Ryan, Nick Foles, Jonathan Taylor, and on and on and on. So they're really banking on just this kind of turn the page kind of new playbook here with Tony Sproul Jr. And it is a bet, because you look at Tony Sproul Jr.'s background, and he comes from the Giants and Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, and the offense they built last year was tremendous running the ball. His track record is shorter, and it isn't the type that you look at and say, this is the instant fix to the pass protection problems. And of course, at the end of the day, that's ultimately going to be the most important thing for building a passing game and for getting the most out of Anthony Richardson. So I do think they're playing with fire a little bit here. I understand why they did it, because they have invested so much in the line, even as they haven't spent anything there really this offseason. It's like the sixth highest paid offensive line in the NFL. But at the end of the day, it's true. If this team specifically is not good up front, they are not going to be a good team, and they're not going to have a good rookie season out of Anthony Richardson. So that group has a ton they have to prove.
Speaking of groups that might have areas they need to prove, Nate Atkins with us, covers the Colts for the Indy Star. When you look at this being contract years for Isaiah Rodgers and for Kenny Moore, they obviously take Juju Brents, a couple other action in the secondary with Darius Rush and Daniel Scott. Where is the bar set, knowing that they do have the flexibility of a rookie quarterback contract with Anthony Richardson, but decisions are going to have to be made when you examine your cornerback room? They did it once this offseason through the draft, but obviously they get rid of Stephon Gilmore, and now here they are with Isaiah Rodgers and Kenny Moore, a similar decision time moment for them when we fast forward the clock's 12 months.
Yeah, that's the room that's getting retooled really as much as any outside of quarterback right now, is that cornerback room and even safety room. And you consider that they had Rodney McLeod for a year. They moved on from him, though, and they're going pretty young there with Rodney Thomas II, Nick Cross, if he's able to step forward, well, with Julian Blackmon. But there's a lot of questions there, because Julian Blackmon, for example, ended last year at nickel corner, and I asked Gus Bradley recently what his position is, and they don't know that yet. So this is a process where they wanted to get young there. They wanted to kind of build up the pipelines, because if you look at how they've managed their resources in recent years, that's kind of been something they didn't do enough of. They haven't gotten draft picks going at cornerback. It's really been Isaiah Rodgers Sr., who was really more of a kick return draft pick, and like you mentioned, he's now already entering a contract year. So they drafted three guys there, and they're going to have to kind of see just what speeds they come along at. I think you should expect, or I expect, that Juju Brents is the one. I'd say he's the one rookie I think is a definite week one starter, unless he gets injured, just because of what's around him. But guys like Darius Rush, and Jalen Johnson, we don't know what they'll be until they're out there, because the jump in competition from even from the SEC and some of what Darius Rush was asked to do, and Jalen Johnson to what they're going to be asked to do in the NFL level is so massive, and there's really no time to kind of adjust to that. And so they just kind of have to see kind of how it plays out in training camp. That's why I think why they did a double bite at it on day 3, drafting 2 of them, is sometimes you don't know who's going to step up between those two, who's ready for the moment, who's ready to be a pro, and who's healthy enough. And so I do think it's a situation, though, where this is sort of a multi-year retool. I don't think this is the group. I just would be surprised if this is the same group we see next year. I think it's more of a situation where they realize they're in a little bit more of a long-term planning mode as a franchise because of the rookie quarterback, at least to the point where this year is almost a little bit more of a gap year for everything that's not just getting the most out of that quarterback. And so what it allows them to do is sort of evaluate the upside in the floors, too, of these young players they're getting, and then go into next year and decide kind of what the structure of that's going to look like. But it does put guys like Isaiah Rodgers and Kenny Moore into spots where they have to prove that they're something that they want to invest in the long run, or that they also want to be here beyond this year, because I don't think for either one of them it's a guarantee.
Nate, I know when we talked to Shaq Leonard the last time he was available to the media, he was saying he hadn't done much running yet, which was expected. So when we went out to OTAs, everyone wasn't shocked to see him on the sideline, sort of just watching. But for you, when do you start to have some alarm bells go off as far as his recovery? And maybe, I guess a simpler way to ask that is, when do you feel comfortable with him being back out there? Like, is it training camp? Is it preseason? Or do you just kind of wait and see? Like, how do you view his process of getting back to being the maniac?
Yeah, it's tough to entirely answer, of course, about us being there with the medical information that they're going through. And it's a very tricky injury, being, a back issue that's also a nerve issue that connects to different body parts. And so I just would say that I'm always going to err on the side of caution, especially after the way they did it last year, where he gets the surgery in June, he sits out training camp, and immediately when we got to the preseason, he's practicing. And the way he's interpreted that, the way they've interpreted that, is that was just too early. That was him really itching, and this is how Shaq's wired. He has a hard time watching his teammates really go through the dog days and not being out there. He has a hard time just leading through talking, which he does plenty well too, but he wants to be able to do it from the huddle, and I get that. But that temptation, kind of led him down a path where, it ended up setting him back, getting a second surgery late last year. So I think that the offseason program has to be completely off the table, just out of the side of caution. And then you get into training camp, and by that point, you do the math on that, that's probably about 7 or 8 months of recovery. You'd like to think that that's where you get into more of a conversation of bringing him back. But like last year, the issue they had is they would have him practice and they would look at the film and they'd match it up with how he played, and it was nowhere near. The two were just so far off. And so that, even aside from the risk of re-injury, was a problem, is that he wasn't the maniac again. And so they need to, really just bank on the fact that he has a style, he knows how to play, he knows how to lead, and his teammates are going to believe in the fact that he's doing everything he can to recover the right way this time and be there whenever he's ready. And it's more important to do that than to just get him back out there. So I think we'll see him in training camp because of the timeline. If he's not out there at all in training camp, I mean, I certainly would start to have questions. But again, for me, there are always going to be more questions than, alarm bells, because really the most alarming thing last year was how early he came back, and that ended up being the issue.
Nate, you've opened up the Colts mailbag a couple times this offseason, getting set up as well again for resumption of OTAs. Non-Anthony Richardson division, non-Gardner Minshew division, what's been the biggest thing on Colts fans' mind to this point outside of who's starting? Tell us, Nate. Tell us.
Yeah, it's such an offensive-minded, fan base, always has been. That's especially true when you draft a quarterback. So everything to them is about, it's not about Anthony, it's about the supportive pieces around him. So everyone's, they've asked questions like, why is the offensive line the same that it was last year? I thought that was the whole problem. I thought that was what was going to change. And so that's kind of led me down thinking through kind of what we just talked about. And the other thing that a lot of people seem interested in is the tight end room, because they have so many bodies in there, and most of them are very packed around the same kind of age and development track of guys in their first, second, or third year. And you just wonder kind of how that's going to shake out when you also factor in that it's a new playbook. It's Shane Steichen's offense coming from Philadelphia, where Dallas Goedert was such a big force. But how many guys can factor into that conversation? You have so many questions in there with like Drew Ogletree coming off an ACL injury. With how ready is he going to be? How ready is Jelani Woods to take that next step to being somebody? Kind of how does Will Mallory, their 5th-round pick out of Miami, how does he fit into a room? What does that say for Kylan Granson? And they're all good questions because I don't know the answers to all of them. We're not going to know that until we get into training camp. And I think it's one of those situations where the Colts realized last year in camp they just didn't have enough pressure on certain veterans. They didn't have enough guys pushing for roster spots to where the spots in their roster that were weak, they weren't just weak because the players in them weren't that good. It's just there was no fallback to it. There was no fallback, for example, at left tackle and right guard, realistic week 1 fallback because of the way they had built that. So adding a few more picks and a few more veterans to that room, tight end specifically, it just opens up a little bit more or introduces a little bit more pressure, I think, on the guys they do have. And, their idea being that these guys under pressure, they're either going to rise to the moment and push and excel, or it's going to expose that they're maybe not ready for the type of pressure you have to be able to thrive under at this level. Either way is a kind of important evaluative tool, and it's just a way for them to do training camp a little bit differently this year than last year.
Well, Nate, man, really appreciate your time. I know I hit you up last night, kind of last minute, and I knew you would come in the clutch because that's what you do for me. So I appreciate that, man. I'll see you later this week to bug you and continue to annoy you as I head into my second NFL season with you by my side to mentor me now that Zach has ditched me.
Oh, yeah. Hit me up anytime, and I'll hit you up sometime with some more bad NBA Finals takes, and we'll see who has the worst takes as this thing plays out.
All right, sounds good. That was Nate Atkins, Indy Star Colts reporter, my buddy, and he's not lying. We talk all the time about NBA, and he was even telling me about his first 500 experience getting out there and covering it along with the Indy Star team this past weekend. So good for him, and he made a lot of good points, I thought, as far as Shaq's health, where Anthony Richardson is, and again, that offensive line that I'm going to harp on because to me, it is the least sexy thing to talk about, but probably the most important thing outside of the quarterback itself.
It can't get overlooked when you're debating whether Anthony Richardson should start and when you're looking at the long-term health of Jonathan Taylor as a running back looking for a bounce-back year within the NFL. We're going to pivot for a second. When we come back, we'll put a bow on this 1 o'clock hour at top of the 2 o'clock hour. Sam Amico of HoopsWire.com gets us set for the NBA Finals on the Fan.
Fan.
Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison behind the Ones and Twos Fan Midday Show. Interesting news in the NFL, James. I got to get your thoughts on this before we go to break with our conversation with Sam Amico as we get ready for the NBA Finals. But I know you've been worried about this and losing sleep over it. Aaron Rodgers is going to be limited on Wednesday with that calf injury that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And head coach Robert Saleh told reporters he'll be a full go by Friday. What does it all mean, James?
It means he's old. That's all it means. He's old. He'll be fine when the season starts. But, hey, Father Time is knocking at the door.
James, you got to get excited. The Aaron Rodgers news is flowing in. You know what time it is. We'll keep that conversation rolling.
Here you go.
And look at the AFC quarterback arms race in the bottom of the 2 o'clock hour. But NBA Finals are on the horizon. They start tomorrow. Sam Amico going to join us when we return. Get us set on the Fan Midday Show.
Come with me now.
Here in the DriveHugo.com studio, alongside Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison, I'm James Boyd. Having a good time on this Wednesday afternoon, hump day. We've talked about NBA, NFL. Now we're back to the NBA with my buddy Sam Amico, covers the NBA for Hoops Wire. He's been covering the NBA for a long time and reading him since I was, I believe, in high school. So it's been about 10 years. Sam, how you doing?
Good, Jared. It's good to know you've been reading me that long. It's all scary that I've been doing that long. But either way, it's good.
No, that's the privilege of it, my man. And so, obviously, tomorrow night we get into the thick of things when it comes to the NBA Finals. All of the other teams have fallen away. We got 2 teams left with the Heat and the Nuggets. I want to know, what is your early outlook for how Miami could somehow, some way, slow down that Denver Nuggets offense that obviously starts with Nikola Jokic?
Well, we saw Miami play some zone, and in the Eastern Conference Finals, kind of worked against the Celtics, kept them outside on the perimeter, shooting a lot of perimeter shots. The Nuggets, however, have a lot of guys who can knock those down. Obviously, you talk about Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. shooting at an extremely impressive clip. Jokic can hit him. And Aaron Gordon as well. So there's a lot of guys that, you look at the Nuggets and you say, we don't really want them shooting outside shots, but, the further you are away from the basket, typically the percentages go down. So, I would envision Miami playing some zone, really just trying to throw all kinds of bodies at Jokic and Murray, and doing it like they've done the entire playoffs. Nobody expects them to overcome anything, yet they've done it in the play-in tournament, and they've done it every series. So certainly I would imagine that Coach Eric Spoelstra will figure out some way to at least contain that high-scoring Denver attack.
Sam, how much of the approach that Miami's going to take to this should be centered around, look what Jokic just did to Anthony Davis last round, look at the player that he is? Bama is a great player in his own right, but how much is he going to really be able to slow down Jokic? We're going to let him do his thing, but we cannot let, by any circumstances, guys like Aaron Gordon or guys like Jamal Murray be the difference makers that bring home a onslaught of offensive power that ran LA out of the gym in 4 games.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Jokic is going to do his thing. Odds are Murray's going to do his thing. You've got to contain the Contavious Caldwell-Popes and Aaron Gordons and Michael Porter Jr.'s and Browns. You've got to make those guys miserable, and have some of their worst games. Because the star players generally are, you're not going to see an 8.6 rebound game from any of those guys. They're going to get their stats. They're going to get their numbers. There's really you just want to make the opposing star players work as much as they can. And so often in these series, and we've seen this with Miami winning through the Eastern Conferences, their role players outplayed the opponent's role players. And that's so often what it's going to come down to. And, I would imagine that Coach Spoelstra and even Coach Malone from the Nuggets, they're both stressing that we need a little bit of everything from everybody, because if either team's role players get going, then that's going to be the series.
When you look at what Caleb Martin has been able to do throughout the playoffs, particularly in the Eastern Conference Finals, are you surprised at how he's been able to sustain it? I mean, you expect a role player to step up a game or two, but there was a legitimate argument to be made for him to be the Eastern Conference Finals MVP.
Yeah, I don't think anybody saw that coming. And I think that the fact that he was able to sustain it was something that probably the Heat didn't even expect. Like you said, usually a role player will get you going for a game or two. Like, for instance, we saw Lonnie Walker do that for one game against the Warriors, and then he went back to being, what he was expected to be, an 8th or 9th man. Martin hasn't done that. He's been able to continue to be either option A or B for the entire playoffs. And I think a lot of that is a guy coming into his own when it means the most, getting into a rhythm and really showing, look, I kind of found my game. And really it's a case of a guy just being a really good fit in the place where he is. Maybe he wouldn't be doing this if he played for another team, but the fact that Jimmy Butler you have to put so much focus on him if you're the opponent, has created opportunities for other guys, and Martin has just taken it and run with it, probably more than, like I said, even Miami was expecting.
Tim, how does Kevin Love's minutes and opportunity for him change in this series, if at all, compared to where he was against Boston? Obviously, you're not expecting anywhere near the expectations that were on his shoulders in Minnesota or even in Cleveland as a 34-year-old that has established his role in this Miami team. But you look at the minutes and his ability to impact things against Milwaukee, a series high of 32 minutes in that particular matchup against Milwaukee, 22, 21, goes on. Teetered out a little bit against New York, but the same, and then at times just not. He took advantage of his minutes, but there was a bit of a modification with how the Heat wanted to play things as a whole against Boston. Does that increase or stay about the same as that Boston series for what Kevin Love's role will be for Miami?
Yeah, I think it'll increase a little bit against the Nuggets, just because he's number one. He's been in this situation before. He's won a championship with Cleveland back in 2016. He's been to multiple finals with the Cavs. And the things he offers, which isn't a whole lot, but it's enough. And it's enough rebounding. It's enough keeping the Nuggets off the boards a little bit. And, for Kevin Love, just as it's been all playoffs, if he can knock down some three-pointers, he'll see an increased opportunity just because he has size. And he still does have rebounding prowess. He's, and especially if Miami decides they're going to play a zone, you could kind of hide his defensive deficiencies while using him as a rebounder. So I would suspect that he's going to get at least an increased opportunity as opposed to what, he had against Boston where he only played a couple minutes here and there. I think that they're going to turn to him early and see what he can give them because, again, of all those kind of little X factors that he will bring, could end up, helping Miami in little ways that don't show up on the stat sheet.
Sam, taking a step back from the finals and looking at both teams' paths to the finals, obviously Miami had to go through a pretty dramatic one to get past Boston. And I'm looking at Boston. Jaylen Brown, he's eligible for the Supermax. They're the only team that can offer him that much money, which obviously would be a reason for him to return. But do they give it to him? If you're, Brad Stevens, if you're one of the higher-ups in Boston, putting you, I guess in that GM chair, do you give him that Supermax or do you maybe come at him with an offer that still be a max but just not something of that caliber given how he played in that series and particularly in Game 7?
Well, I think that you start with a max and see where you stand there. As far as a super max, that may be it. What he ends up getting. The one thing with guys like Jaylen Brown is you have to look at, if we were to move him or to lose him, would we be able to replace him? If we were going to trade Jaylen Brown and you're the Celtics, do you say we're going to get back equal or better value? That would be tough. He's an all-star, and those are the kind of guys you build the team around. And what if you go out and get another guy or another three guys, and they end up having the same type of Game 7? I just think you don't want to make a change with an all-star just for the sake of change. I think and the Celtics have tried. They've tried to build around Brown and Tatum by getting Malcolm Brogdon and Gallinari, who was out all season with a knee injury. So I suspect that he'll end up, for better or worse, I suspect that he's going to get a Supermax and return to Boston, and they're going to continue to build around the team. I think it's always you run the risk of getting worse when you make change just for the sake of it. You have to remember Boston had a Game 7 at home in the Eastern Conference Finals. Last year they advanced to the finals. I certainly don't see any reason for panic, especially in today's NBA, which we really see has a ton of parity, and you're always one bad bounce away from getting back to the finals. So, I don't suspect Boston's going to panic. I think that, look, we're going to have to pay him the Supermax eventually, And it's up to Brad Stevens and the rest of the front office to build around Brown and Tatum.
Sam, do you expect Joe Mazzulla to be back? Because I know beyond what we saw on the floor, there has to be some blame or fault that falls on the shoulders of the coach, and they did give him an extension. Not saying it's all his fault. Obviously, he was given a tough task to kind of step in there after what happened, with the previous coach. But do you expect him to be back, given the investment they've already made in him?
Yeah, I think he'll be back. Doing his first time to the final of the game. It's a lot that obviously blew that, but he got him within a game of the finals. And I just think again, if you fired, you're not just firing him. You're pretty much getting rid of the stuff. And I think that the players like and respect Mazzulla. And that goes a long way in terms of effort from the players. So, and first playoffs as a coach, I think that it'd be hard pressed to say, we need to let him go because he made a couple of hiccups here and there in some of the bigger games. But it's just a matter of, again, do we find somebody better to replace him, somebody we're more confident in, or was this just a case of a guy getting his first taste of the NBA playoffs as a head coach? Will he be better next year? I think that you try to bank on those things, that he'll develop as well, just like you would a player.
Sam, we're trying to find avenues as we look at this offseason for where the Pacers can take a step forward within their rebuild process. As you look up and down the Eastern Conference and you look at candidates for teams, because there's a lot of turmoil there. Obviously, Milwaukee has found their coach. Boston's going to have the Jaylen Brown decision to make, as James just alluded to. Philadelphia has found their coach, but what's going to happen with James Harden? And you go down further than that, Cleveland, New York, Brooklyn, Atlanta. Obviously, we know about Miami, but we'll leave them off the table since they're in the finals. Where is there the biggest look in the mirror moment for these teams? Like, who has the toughest path for decision-making this offseason amongst playoff teams in the East? And who is the best candidate ripe for regression to where a team like the Pacers that's on the outside of the play-in picture looking in feels like, hey, we could be in that playoff conversation next year, assuming all goes well for them in the draft?
Yeah, first I would say the 76ers, obviously need to take a look in the mirror and say we keep losing in the second round. Obviously, they made a coaching change, hiring Nick Nurse. Will that be enough to get him over the top? They still have, James Harden expected to opt out of his contract, seeking a 4-year deal, supposedly. That's something that they're going to have to weigh. I really think if you're Philadelphia, you're thinking, man, Miami got to the finals. This really could have been our season. But we just can't get it done. And they have some nice pieces there, outside of Embiid, Harden, and Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey. I just think if you're Philadelphia, you're taking a long look in the mirror. Milwaukee, same thing. Why did we lose in the first round? What happened there? You have to think it was more than coaching. They added Jay Crowder. They're a veteran team with Giannis and Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday. They have to look in the mirror and say, what went wrong here? What more do we need? Because really, they were pretty much the best team in the East from January on until the first round of the playoffs. So, as far as the Pacers go, I would think that the Denver Nuggets and Miami Heat being in the finals would give every team hope. And this is the kind of parity that the NBA has wanted for some time. It used to be you used to know who was going to be in the finals before the season even started. Now it's a huge guessing game. I don't even think anybody picked the Nuggets and the Heat to meet in the finals before the playoffs, probably even in the second round. So, I think teams like the Pacers that have showed some promise early on until some injuries set in to Tyrese Halliburton. I think that, they look at this like, yeah, we could only be a couple pieces away. If the Miami Heat are able to get to the finals as a number 8 seed, just stay the course, fill around the edges. And the Nuggets are a good example of that, too. I mean, this program's with Jokic has been together 8 years, and Michael Malone, and they've really kind of stayed the course, haven't made any huge splashy moves. They got Gordon. They got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Nobody thought those trades were much of a big deal. And I think if you're Kevin Pritchard with the Pacers, you're looking at that saying, you know what, let's go out, fill around the guys that we have, and give this thing some time. And as the Heat Nuggets have proved, anybody can get there. Just a couple of good players, and I think there's a lot to be said for familiarity and keeping guys together. That it tends to serve you well when it comes to playoffs. I just think the Pacers just need, a little bit more time and have a nice 4 players there with Turner, Hield, obviously Halliburton's fantastic, and Mathurin is also going to be on his way up. So you've got a nice starting point. You've got a lot of draft picks. There's a lot of things you can do if you're Indiana. I think this could be a very promising off season for them.
Sam, the Pacers have been to the finals before, never won it. The Nuggets are making their first trip there, have a chance to win their first championship. What do you think it'll mean for that franchise as a whole, and then also as an individual, Nikola Jokic, and where his career is and where we look at him as far as being one of the all-time greats?
It's kind of funny. A guy who's won back-to-back MVPs a couple years ago in Jokic has not got really kind of that elite A-level super-duper star treatment. And I think winning a championship certainly put him up there. And he that's not to say he's underrated, because he certainly gets plenty of accolades. But I think until you win a title and get a ring, you're really not considered amongst the most elite even of the game today. Today we talk about Giannis and Kevin Durant and LeBron James, all worthy guys when it comes to receiving the NBA's highest accolades. But, in order to join that group, you've got to win a championship. And just the fact, again, when you're relating it to the Pacers, you look at, here's a team that everybody, in January, February, even the beginning of the playoffs, they won the Western Conference, had the number 1 seed in the West going into the playoffs, and nobody thought that they were going to get to the finals, myself included. Everybody, they're not getting there. They're kind of the paper regular season champion. So, again, if you're Indiana, you look at that, you look at what Miami has done, and you say, it's proof right now that we're not that far off. And if we stay together and just add some pieces, it could be where these teams are, and probably sooner than you might think.
Sam Amico with us of hoopswire.com. Sam, you mentioned already the keys to how Miami could potentially slow Denver down, but it also feels like, and rightfully so, it's a 1 versus 8. I get that the prevailing thought is still Denver's going to win this series. Like, whether it's Miami's gassed, whether it's they don't have the best player on the floor, the Nuggets have that. It feels like there's a large push, again, probably rightfully so, that Denver's going to take this thing. When you look at Miami, everything they've been able to do on this postseason run, the chances they maybe get Tyler Hero back, for them to win this, if we're playing that out, where does it rank in terms of just the accomplishment for Miami, but league-wide history to be an 8 seed, only the second to ever get to the finals, but then pull off what many would feel would be a pretty massive upset given the dominance Denver's had during this postseason run?
It would rank way up there. First play-in tournament team. Obviously, they haven't had the play-in tournament very long, but becoming the first play-in tournament championship, first number 8 seed to win a championship, and the fact that they enter as big underdogs as they have in just about every series except for maybe the Knicks, just would be a situation that, we would be witnessing history. And I will say, the Nuggets are big favorites. I don't know that the Nuggets are bigger favorites than against the Heat than the Milwaukee Bucks were. And they managed to take care of that. And the one thing I will say about the Heat is they've managed to take just about everybody out of their games. at one point or another. Completely stop them from doing what they want to do. And, a lot of that's a credit to Eric Spoelstra, recognizing what the other team does well, and for the players for just delivering and continuing to believe. That all falls, a lot of that falls on your star, Jimmy Butler, who has, before Game 7 in Boston, saying, yeah, we're going to go in there and win this. We're going to win this series eventually. He kept saying that as they lost. Boston came back and tied it up at 3-3. You kept hearing Jimmy Butler act like it was no big deal, So I think that whole team has taken on Butler's attitudes. Spoelstra's making the adjustments. And I think you'd be silly to count them out, regardless of what things look like on paper, because they have not been the favorite in any series, have not had home court in any series. And here they are in the NBA Finals.
Sam, feet to fire. Who is going to win the finals and how many games?
I'm going to go with the Nuggets in 6, but I will say this. I've been wrong just about every series I've predicted in the playoffs. So I wouldn't bet on that. I would just say, yeah, this is what that Amico guy says. He hasn't gotten anything right yet. But if I look at it with like we always say, the best player on the floor is probably Jokic by a whisker. I wouldn't give him a huge edge over Butler in the playoffs. And then you just look at the overall depth. You would think that this is going to be Denver's year. They've been number 1 in the West since December, and it just feels to me like they're ready to win this, and they're playing at an extremely high level with a lot of confidence.
Sam, thanks so much for your time. I'll be sure to tag you and at you and message you if you're wrong about the finals, as I'm sure everyone will do the same for me. But
all right, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, and you take it easy. We'll talk soon.
All right, thanks a lot for having me. Take care.
All right, that was Sam Amico, NBA writer for hoopswire.com. You can follow him at Amico Hoops on Twitter. He's someone who's been around the game for a very long time, seen a lot of great players, and to hear him talk about Jokic and the love maybe he hasn't received is valid. And I think it's fascinating that the NBA still has the position All-NBA teams. I forget if they've changed it or not. They should, because there's no way.
They are, correct?
Yeah, this past voting cycle was the last time, so it'll be positionless from here on out.
Thank goodness, because I remember doing all area teams when I was up in the region, and I would have years, seriously, where I would have 5 guards of the 5 best players, and parents would get upset, but it's like, no, I'm not going to pick a kid just because they play a certain position on the floor. There's no reason for that. I mean, I'm looking at Jokic's Wikipedia page right now. He's second team All-NBA this season. That's insane. Like, that is so wrong. It's the same as when Marc Gasol won Defensive Player of the Year one year and he was second team all defense. Like, that stuff shouldn't happen. And so I'm glad they're changing that rule, because if he wins this championship and if he gets the finals MVP and continues to put up the numbers he's put up, there's a legitimate argument to be made that Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world.
We'll discuss more on our NBA Finals predictions and thoughts into tomorrow. A little bit more when we come back. But after the break, we've got a little Purdue nugget for you, but it's not the one you've been waiting for. We'll discuss that when we come back here on The Fan. It's a big day for Purdue Boilermaker fans, for Purdue University, and for one of their very best in star big man Zach Edey. It's decision day for him, as he has to make a choice whether or not he's going to return for another year up at West Lafayette. Feels like he has some unfinished business, and oh boy, that NIL money is very, very nice, not just for Zach Edey, but for many of the top athletes in the sport across college athletics. But that is the name of the game in today's college basketball world, college football world, you name it. NIL can be a sweet talker to the point that you want to come back. And of course, Zach Edey has shown a commitment to Purdue basketball where he values what Coach Painter has been able to do for him in his development. And I'm sure there's a minor feeling of unfinished business with how things ended last year with Fairleigh Dickinson bouncing them in the 16 versus 1 matchup. That decision, though, has not been made yet. We mentioned a little Purdue nugget for you if you're just hungry and excited for the start of college athletics to resume. We're still a handful of months away from that, but kickoff times finally being finalized, laid out, and ironed out across college football rankings, including a couple for the Purdue Boilermakers in the first 4 weeks of the season. That includes a matchup with Fresno State at noon on Big Ten Network, Virginia Tech at noon on ESPN2, Syracuse at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, that one on NBC, and that is the marquee matchup in terms of the point of all this, which is that we see big money thrown around all the time in media rights moves, and NBC made that massive pact with the Big Ten Network of Saturday Night Football on NBC, on Peacock. It's going to be great. You got to be there for it. It's Purdue-Syracuse, which on paper, I get it, not exactly a sexy matchup.
It's a basketball matchup.
But I will say this
much. Basketball matchup.
It is a basketball matchup. You could argue that they're basketball schools in terms of Syracuse definitely. For Purdue, I get it. There's a lot of Purdue football fans that are like, no, we're right there.
They're a marching band school.
Exactly. But I bring this up because I was with a friend of mine. Shout out to Nick Kuntz, a diehard Purdue fan. And we were in Milwaukee. Yankees were playing up there. And it was Purdue-Syracuse. And James, we were on TV as we were waiting for the game. James is one of the most ugly displays. If you're an offensive fan, you would have hated it. And here's why. Because throughout that game, it was 10-9 after 3 quarters. It was brutal.
Wait, what?
10-9.
What year was this?
Last year. Not 1940. It was last year. It was 10-9 through 3 quarters of football. It finished 32-29.
Oh.
So you ended up getting your adrenaline rush. You just had to sit through 3 quarters of muck. Purdue loses the game. There were a couple tough penalty calls that were thrown out against the Boilermakers, and it led to a really high drama affair. But Syracuse wins that game. The point is, never judge a matchup straight by its cover, because if you're as hungry for college football as a lot of us are, and if you're NBC, this is why you're tweeting this out right now on May 31st. You're trying to get everybody's mind set for all the Big Ten money that is being spent by NBC to have this Saturday night slate. But I understand from your reactions and Eddie's reactions and his truly genuine woos that Purdue-Syracuse might not be the true destination matchup that one was hoping for with this Big Ten Saturday night slate.
Well, I'll take that game and raise you one.
Uh-oh.
When I was still covering Illinois, my alma mater, they upset number 7 Penn State.
He did air quotes for the radio audience and podcast audience. There were air quotes after the word upset by James Boyd.
9 overtimes. This is in Happy Valley, and it was 20-18. It was the worst game I have ever seen. It was hilarious because the overtimes just kept coming. I believe when one of the teams finally scored, of course the other team scored. They were like, oh my gosh, they're going to do this again. It was a horrible display of football, but one of the most, I say this air quotes again, iconic wins in program history. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, that was actually the last game I covered on that beat before going over to the Pacers. And I was thinking good riddance because that was rough to watch.
Eddie, do you have any cards to deal out in this bad football conversation?
Yes, I've got some more that'll be on NBC in the Big Ten in September. September 2nd, West Virginia at Penn State.
Woo!
Not a doozy, but here we go. You ready?
We're ready.
Charlotte at Maryland.
Yes!
That is a
absolutely
game on NBC.
Inject it into my veins.
Oh, goodness.
Under the lights. Come on.
Because that is going to draw all the viewers right there.
It will set records. It's pretty. When is that game, by
James
the way?
is just so ecstatic that he's just speechless over there.
When is that game?
I'll take a pass.
It is September 9th.
Is that week 1? For NBC's coverage, not
I
for...
would believe so. Yeah. No, it's their second game. West Virginia, Penn State, September 2nd. Charlotte at Maryland, September 9th. Syracuse at Purdue, September 16th.
I was going to say, because that's week 2 is that Charlotte-Penn State match, or Charlotte-Maryland matchup that Eddie is referring to. Jokingly aside, you could easily, James, get a PR tweet from NBC that says, most watched game in the history of Big Ten Saturday night on Peacock and NBC, because you only have 3 games before it. So PR spin, for those that are in that industry, it's how you do it. It's a record-setting moment, James. You're going to want to be a part of that. Come on.
Jimmy, no matter how much you raise your voice, that is not going to change my
opinion. It could be
opinion.
awesome, James. We can go higher. I can do it.
Man, look, all I know is I'm not paying for a Peacock subscription to watch that game. It's not going to happen. Sorry.
No, it won't. It won't for me either.
I won't advertise how you watch the game otherwise, but there are ways out there, my friend.
Are you trying to discuss the high seas? Is that what you're talking about?
No. I'm just saying, like, we live in the internet age, baby, so... There's not a game or anything that I don't want to watch that I cannot watch.
That's why I'm asking. Are you attaching a flag that looks an awful lot like the Raiders logo to your computer? Is that what we're saying here?
Hey, man, you do what you have to. That's all. I'll leave it at that.
In all seriousness, though, it is exciting from a Big Ten perspective of trying to make a marquee aspect of your further college football plans. And just like when we arrive at different destinations on the calendar, once the NFL season arrives, once the NBA action finally gets underway, the fresh season is always going to have dominance to it. And we do. We miss college football, but Eddie is right. There's a couple of matchups where on paper they might deliver something, but more often than not, you run into a matchup, particularly if you're a team that, like, take Indiana football, for example, take Purdue football, take Illinois football. There's been struggles over the last couple of years, ups and downs at times, to where a matchup like that, you point and you laugh. It's like, oh, Maryland against Charlotte, that does more damage for you as a Maryland fan base if you wind up dropping that game for the millions and millions of viewers, including James, that'll be watching that Charlotte-Maryland showdown, no doubt, second Saturday of the college football season.
The Charlotte 49ers. I have a buddy who covers Charlotte. Don't want to make any jokes about them, but yeah, I don't think I'll be tuning into that one because I'm not from Charlotte and I don't cover Charlotte. So, yeah, and just to stray, I guess, to the Hornets, they also give me a lot of pain when I watch them, so I don't know about Charlotte.
It's tough with sports within that city. It really is. There's such a great level of promise and a great area in terms of just being very, very close to the coast, but yeah, the sports have not delivered the way they have wanted to over the last couple of years. Speaking of sports moments or exciting moments within sports, we're going to get back to our NBA Finals conversation here in just a second, but shout out to the Indy 11. Governor Holcomb, Amir Hogsett, and hundreds of other business and civic leaders were at 11 Park, the future site of that brand new stadium between Indy 11 and the Keystone Group. Ground was broken today. Very exciting for the Indy 11 as they continue to make themselves a permanent namestay within the city of Indianapolis. And that whole area, really, with the renderings and everything, I mean, it's going to be, obviously my dream for the 11 is still, and this is I vow it, James, it's a declaration I'm willing to make today. The second that the Indy 11, and I go to sparing matches every now and again, like I'll go to 2 or 3 throughout a season. Second MLS comes on the table, and I know that's what this ownership group wants. Season tickets, baby. Let's go. Let's ride. I'm diving in.
Oh, yes.
I'm all in. Legitimately, chips all in. Not Jim or say hyperbole. Chips all in. Whatever MLS. There it is. Yes. You know it.
Period.
We're going to learn how a sausage is made once the Indy 11 are there. It's going to be a beautiful thing.
I don't know how to make sausage. I don't know what goes into sausage. But I do know how to build a football team.
I've got it on standby.
I was going to say, why do you have this queued up?
Because they're beautiful.
Oh, my goodness.
They're beautiful.
I will
get
say
some
this.
Saturdays for you if you want.
I mean, shout out Jim Irsay. He does give the sound bites, and he certainly keeps
the guy's a winner.
If you have the Anthony Richardson superhero comment already queued up,
I don't.
Something.
I need to add it.
It's a good idea. Eddie will add that in.
I'm telling you,
for you tomorrow. You're still here.
Look, Irsay always has the quotes.
Add some Jeff Saturday nuggets for him too. I know James really wants to have those at the ready for tomorrow's show.
I'll pass. Have my experience with that. Went through it. I guess got better because of it. Crazy season, but yeah, I don't know about any more Jeff Saturday quotes or comments. I'm actually curious, in all seriousness, to see if he goes back to ESPN, because who better to ask about being a coach in the NFL than him, or adjustments and things like that.
I mean, we can make all the jokes.
His
and
insight
I was
would be
one
great.
of them. I was one of them to make those jokes. We can make all the jokes we want about Jeff Saturday, the coach, and just the wild circus that all of that was. I never had a problem and thoroughly enjoyed Jeff Saturday, the analyst. I greatly enjoyed him on ESPN and with NFL Live. So, yeah, I mean, if I was him, the way that people like Mina Kimes and Dan Orlovsky continue to go to bat for him and support him, rightfully so, as one of their own, yeah, if there's a bridge there, money's pretty good. Regardless of the network you're on, you make the network TV, my man. It's as good as anything you're going to find. I would do it. If the pathway's there, I would do it.
I mean, everyone has a price, and people talk about even Pat McAfee being a sellout. Yes, you would sell out for a lot of money. But I just think that his insight would actually be pretty fascinating, considering that he's now a former player, former coach, things like that. So we'll see if that happens. But I guess getting back to Colts land in general, I'm just excited to see what they have for me Friday. I know we've all kind of been waiting around, and it feels like every time we go to see any of the rookies or the team together, it's never enough. But it is enough to hold us over and give us something to talk about and kind of dive into, and obviously to get more and more player reactions to not only Anthony Richardson, but just what's being changed as far as the team and the way they're coming together behind or underneath Shane Steichen.
We asked this of Mike Chappell yesterday, Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, with Eddie Garrison, here on the Fan Midday Show, but we asked him how he evaluates OTAs with all the benchmark OTA assignments and dates that are on the calendar through June until we have that gap until training camp. And we've joked a couple times that you kind of had to keep your head on a swivel and we're going a mile a minute last year, because when you jumped on the beat, it was about August, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right?
It was pretty crazy, man. A lot to learn, a lot to pick up on. And obviously, I don't think anybody could have predicted that season, even if it didn't go well. Just so many changes that happened throughout the season, coaching changes, quarterback changes, the injuries to JT and Shaquille Leonard. So it was a lot going on for me, and definitely something where when the season ended, I was like, kind of like Rocky, put the hands up. I made it. I survived because I was taking, some punches there, man, and really going through it.
So as you adjust to that, the larger question is, with OTAs, this really being your first full off season, fans will never really know what that process is like, other than the brief windows of exposure they get either through training camp or seeing your coverage or seeing Kevin Bowen's coverage here with us on 1075thefan.com. Obviously, your stuff on The Athletic. How does your approach, and what is that process like from a coverage standpoint, knowing that there is this gap coming in June, but all the storylines that are going to be carried over to training camp are taking place during these OTAs, in terms of trying to find any little needle in the haystack of not just Anthony Richardson, but how's the offensive line looking, the pressure on the cornerback room, the 7 tight ends that are on the roster.
Yeah, I think a lot of it will be overstated or understated because you can't really gauge it too much with the little bit of viewing that you get. Even when we're at practice and we get to view practice, the first 15 minutes is just stretching. And so it's not like they're going to give you an extra 15 minutes on the other end to see the real stuff. And then once the good stuff starts to happen, when you got to put your cameras down, your phones down. I know a lot of fans always ask, how come we didn't get any video of this? It's because we can't video or take photos of certain parts. That's only for in-house Colts media. And so the other part that I have to focus on beyond just what I'm viewing with my eyes is the relationship building. You want to make sure that every time you're showing up for something, you're shaking a hand, you're introducing yourself, you're establishing some rapport with the players, especially the newcomers. That way you're not just someone who's transactional, you know what I mean? Where it's just, I'm going to, quote what you say, never actually ask you how your day is going, or, you never know my name, things like that. So I think that's what I'm going to be working towards a lot more than I had time to do last year, was just build relationships going into, the thick of things when it comes to training camp. That way by, August, there isn't some, who is this guy? It's, there's James, asking about XYZ. They kind of know my style of my approach and things like that. And at the end of the day, as much as I joke about the job and what we do, you do have to realize you're talking about humans every day. So, you can't be fluffy and soft and, too nice, but you also have to have that respect level there where it goes both ways and there's a two-way street that you both can drive down and kind of meet in the middle where it comes down to, assessing what they're doing and then on the flip side, them assessing what I'm doing as a reporter.
There's a public service announcement that I want to make to our listening audience, and this is sometimes stressed, but if you aren't aware of it with how knee-jerky and 24/7 sports cycle our society has become, there's an importance to what James just said, and it's this. We always look at it from like, oh, well, you should ask tough questions or aggressive questions, and that's part of the job. But in terms of story angle, you're not going to find a hit piece from James because James is a beat writer. If you're looking for an outlandish reaction to things, James is going to give that on Twitter. But there's a difference between being on the beat and having a two-way street of information, both from the players and then giving that to you, the fans, as a beat reporter versus if you're, a writer that we greatly enjoy, another member of The Athletic and Bob Kravitz, his job is to take all that information and then give us perspective on it. A lot like what we do here on the Fan Midday Show, like what JMV does from that angle. So in general, if you are looking this Colts season, if you're trying to have one takeaway from your Colts coverage, know that you're getting different perspectives and there's a fine difference between being a columnist and being a team beat reporter, like what you're doing. We're relying on you for information.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it. Obviously, you have to be critical in certain situations.
Sure.
I think what's funny with all coverage and all sports is when the fans get upset, and rightfully so, right? For example, after the Minnesota game last year, there was a lot of comments, ask this, do this,
Right.
and they want you to express their anger in the questions and how you ask them, but that's not the job.
Right.
I think for us, it's to take the emotion out of it, which sometimes is not fun. You want to lean into that, but you have to pull yourself back. Remember that they're all humans, and you have to be stern but respectful at the same time. Now, that might not elicit the answers that you want, and to be honest, Jimmy, you've seen it. Especially even a perfect example is Jaylen Brown for Boston. Comes out, plays bad, goes to the podium. He says, I failed. I did not do well. We failed. It was not good. And it's still not enough for some fans. It's like, oh, he should have said he was. And it's never enough, right? So I will say this. In regards to the coverage right now, you won't see too much of me being all the way critical, all the way praising, just
nothing's
because
happened.
nothing's exactly. Now, when we get more information to work with,
Sure.
then I'll have more to say. And that's not just saying we have to wait all the way until games start to happen in September. It'll be when we see just more live action throughout, training camp, the joint practices with the Chicago Bears, things like that. But right now, I'm getting killed because I'm not, one way or the other. It's hard to be because we're only seeing, for those who don't understand, when we go to practice, we might see legitimately 30 to 45 minutes, and it's all structured. So just how you look at the combine, it's similar to that to a degree where it's all scripted, and so it's routes against air. You can't hit the quarterback. You can't get close to the quarterback. If you get close to Anthony Richardson, you're going to get cut. And so those are the things that you kind of have to weigh into. And, you want to give a little but take a little as well when it comes to your coverage because you don't want to be too one way on these things because you just don't know. And that is what's most fascinating and frustrating about what we do, Jimmy, is that we don't know. We truly do not know what could happen. So I guess it's our job to kind of wait and see and then dissect it from there.
This period is always an area of time where it just makes me laugh on Twitter because there's a fine difference. Like, look, I love, and all sports fans do, I love being emotionally involved and reacting and getting a pulse for the fan base, but it's much easier to do that week 3 than it is May 31st when at best you're making guesses or observations versus really having something that's rooted in fact because we know so little in regard to what this Colts offense is eventually going to look like. As always, you can find Colts coverage at 1075thefan.com. As we mentioned, follow James on Twitter at RomeoVilleKid. Does a great job covering the Colts for The Athletic. He's going to still be in tomorrow with us here on The Fan. And we still have one more segment as well. But one last thing before we step to break. James is so focused on the Colts, he barely has time to keep up with Aaron Rodgers. So if you have any updates or links you want to send him at RomeoVilleKid, he'll appreciate those. Any of them, really. If it's an ankle, turf toe, you name it, James is ready for him there.
Oh, he loves the
Romeo
comment
Kid.
section.
Big fan.
Oh,
Big,
sorry, he loves his mentions. It's not a comment section. Gotta get it right here.
Yeah,
Come on.
Both of you all need to stop this right now.
We'll hand out some bets to close the day on the Fan Midday Show. We return.
The Fan.
We'll close things out strong here on the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook and James Boyd, along with Eddie Garrison, here from the DriveHubler.com studios.
Wait, Jimmy, did you see the Aaron Rodgers update?
Oh, what do you got for me? I love good Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, sorry, there's nothing.
Oh, there's not. It's all right. We'll keep it on watch. James got really excited there for a second.
Why do y'all keep doing this? I have nothing against Aaron Rodgers. Let me state that for the public. I just find it fascinating that we're hearing about his calf this early in the offseason. But
are you
Is it
surprised?
ankle? I thought it was an ankle.
To be honest, it doesn't matter. It's just, again, Father Time's catching up. But
are you willing to state on the record your projection for the New York Jets? Or is it too early in the offseason to do that?
let me think about that. I'll probably get back to you tomorrow. I honestly haven't looked at the schedule.
I don't even record. I just mean expectations with this Aaron Rodgers experiment.
I feel like I'm lower on it than other people, just because he's an older guy, and I feel like at some point, every player, and this is me not even trolling or being joking, I'm being serious. Every player is not going to be Tom Brady, where they're just great until they're 44 or 45, and so I expect at some point, Aaron Rodgers maybe isn't going to be the MVP level guy. If he is, though, obviously that's really great for the Jets.
You think he's better than last year, given what's built around him if he stays healthy? Because that's my thought, is that Green Bay did a disservice to him over the last 5 years of building around him properly up until last season. Me and Eddie have debated about that rookie class at wideout. I'm probably a little too harsh on it, but way better in terms of what he has in New York.
I would say, yes, he definitely has more firepower over there in New York, but again, he's not getting any younger, and so there's going to be a point where that rubber meets the road, and we realize that the Aaron Rodgers that we all knew and appreciated and talked about his greatness might not be as great as he once was. And to me, maybe he isn't peak Aaron Rodgers anymore, but can he just be good enough to make them make some noise? They made a huge investment in him, obviously, and so we'll see how it plays out, because they went all in on that guy, and that's one where you can't, renege on that. You got to kind of stick with it.
I mean, it's the best quarterback addition that they've had in a long time. So it's very much I'm not going to make Eddie hit it again here. If he wants to, he can, but it's very much is a chips all in move by the Jets in terms of their push for.
Can't be used on other teams, Jimmy.
Okay, has to stay in house. I respect that. We have morals on this show, unless it comes to gambling. Let's throw out some bets right now.
Oh, goodness.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not an athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day, we're going to lay 1.5 on the run line for the Houston Astros as they host the Minnesota Twins. It did not pan out for us yesterday, but it's okay. We'll hop back right on the train. Give me 1.5 on the run line for the Atlanta Braves as they are in Oakland against the Athletics. Didn't lose that game, by the way, just didn't cover the run line. Only won that game 2-1. Last one for you in baseball in terms of straight up bets. Give me the New York Yankees on the money line over the Seattle Mariners at plus 120 as the Bronx Bombers go for the sweep out in Seattle. And the last one, this is a response bet, if you will. I'm going to take over half a hit for Aaron Hicks, former New York Yankee. He's in Baltimore, getting a second chance and a new lease on his baseball life. I think he gets over half a hit today for the Baltimore Orioles. They
That's
are
so
in
weird
action
saying over half a
against
hit.
the Cleveland Guardians. I know it feels weird, but that's just what it is on DraftKings. 2-1 yesterday. Eddie, what do you have on your docket, if anything?
I went 1-0 yesterday, so
Well done.
I know I got your Yanks pulled through and hit the over by themselves. I was like, heck yeah, let's go.
Happy to help you out there.
Volpe and your man Judge going yard again. I don't like your Yankees bet for today, though.
Is it because of Clark Schmidt, or is it because Seattle is destined to at least get one here?
That a combination of both, but I think George Kirby's also a really good pitcher for them. He's a really good young pitcher, which is why through the first 5 innings, I'm not going to play anything in that one, surprisingly. A lot of afternoon baseball today. I haven't really been able to dive into it much. I'm interested. It is a little tantalizing. The Guardians are only minus 110, and Shane Bieber has looked like Cy Young Shane Bieber the last 3 starts. He's on the mound today for Cleveland, but when you look at Cleveland, it's always, are they going to be able to score? So I'm not playing anything there. Dodgers, way too juiced for me at the minus 1.5. Patrick Corbin usually gets shelled, but Noah Syndergaard hasn't been good for them either, so I am rolling with nothing today.
James, how excited are you for the start of the NBA Finals? We'll have you in tomorrow so then you can make your official prediction. You put Sam's feet to the fire. Any early tease there of how you feel like that series is going to go?
Jokic.
Fair. What more need you say?
I mean, what do you do with him? He is unbelievable. I get it. And I saw this on Twitter the other day, and they were saying, like, Miami's like Toon team, or the team you see in the cartoon shows where they're competing off love and togetherness and, competitive fire and the underdog. But it's like there's that big bully waiting over there, and we're in real life. And so I get it. Sports has a way of being great as far as just the underdog story. We get to tell that a lot. However, there is the cruelty of sports where sometimes just because you might deserve something, you don't get it because another team might be just as deserving and just better.
There's a team of destiny feel about Miami, and I've always admired Jimmy Butler. I would love to see them get it done. Again, we'll give our official predictions tomorrow. It's going to be a tall task, but not to use too many cliches in this segment, but a lot of it is going to hinge from what we see in game one because everybody is writing off Miami to some extent with the grueling battle they had to go through against the Boston Celtics. Another public service announcement. We gave one out last segment. We'll do it again here. If you're a Purdue fan or a basketball fan or an IU fan that wants to troll Purdue fans, either way is fine. Check your sources with Zach Edey News because it is decision time tonight. And this is another area that's ripe for the taking in terms of what happened. In terms of, we'll move past.
You got it.
In terms of where he's going to end up, if he stays or goes to the NBA or comes back to Purdue. This from Adam Zagoria. He covers college basketball at large for the New York Times, for Forbes, for NJ.com. Says from sources that Zach Edey's decision could very well go down to the wire tonight. He has yet to make a decision at this point. That was about 10 to 15 minutes ago. We'll go around the table real quick before we go close things out. Does he stay or does he go? I say he comes back to Purdue.
Comes back to Purdue. A lot of money to be made down there in West Lafayette.
You feel the same way?
Yes, sir.
I say he goes.
You have time briefly for why, or is it too long to summarize?
His value is not going to be any higher to play in the association. If he has a real dream of playing in the NBA, then I say you go now.
Yeah, the league is very tantalizing sometimes. I agree.
Yep,
Special thanks to Matt Verderame of SI Now, Nate Atkins of the Indy Star, and Sam Amico. Podcast will be up, 1075thefan.com, or search The Fan Midday Show wherever you get your podcast. Pleasure as always having James Boyd in here of The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter at RomeoVilleKid. We'll be back. More Colts, more NBA Finals talk tomorrow. Right up JMV is next.
93.